To order. Attendance this evening at tonight's special board meeting at the library at Columbia High School. To my left, Ms. Massey is here, Ms. Skabersky, Mr. Mann. To my right, Ms. Taylor, Ms. Muth, and then conferencing in is Mr. Dunn and myself. So we do have a quorum tonight. With that, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So tonight's special meeting was a follow-up from conversations that took place at the last board meeting. During this special meeting, we will have conversations around the federal funds, the CRRSA Act and the American Rescue Plan, and the proposal around the ideas around the spending of those funds for the district, and some comments and questions that were raised by board members, an opportunity for Mr. Simons and the administration to respond to those questions, comments, go over the plan in more detail. So we have a special meeting really to just discuss, answer any questions, review what's being planned, and then any other business related to that discussion item. So Mr. Simons, do you want to go through the process of each item? And we have several handouts.
What we were thinking was we would go in order.
Okay.
By number over all of the proposals. And for those that board members did not submit questions regarding, we might just kind of touch on some things that we've talked about.
Okay.
Our administrative team met on Friday morning, and we reviewed all of the board members' questions and went through each item and tried to either provide more details by adding some columns into the document or some supplemental memos and other information that we felt would better explain the proposal and address the board members' questions.
Very good.
So
does that sound like a good plan, everyone, board members?
we would take questions as we go. So rather than wait till the end, if people have questions about proposal number one, after we spend a little time explaining some of the information, we would want to have an exchange at each item so that we don't have to wait until the end. Is that okay for everybody?
Mark, any question?
So just to clarify them, tonight is discussion only.
Yes.
No voting, no agreeing with, disagreeing with, discussion only.
Right. Open remarks, comments, questions related to that. Yep. And then we're based on the feedback, and then the plan actually at the July, remind me, 13th meeting, I believe it is. The reorg and the regular meeting will take place. That'll be when we would finalize the vote on the plan.
We will need to vote on any items that the board supports at the July, I want to be honest, the July 13th meeting. If we wait beyond July 13th, we are going to be in trouble putting any of these programs together for September. So what I'm looking for tonight is not a formal vote, but just a sense of the direction of the board regarding each of these items so that we can know what positions, mainly for the positions the board majority of the board supports, so that we can put resolutions on the board agenda for the 13th. That doesn't mean if somebody has questions between now and the 13th that we can't address those, but I need to know what positions the majority of the board supports in order to put together the resolutions establishing those positions and starting that process. So I don't need you to vote on anything. There's no resolution to approve anything formally. It's not a voting meeting. I just need some general guidance and direction at the end of the discussion.
Jennifer?
In addition to that, though, are you going to need general guidance on all the program areas outside of that as well? Because not tonight.
As I go through each one, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that may not start right in September because some of the logistics of planning it. Some of the after-school programs may not start till October 1st. If you give me a general sense of we're heading in the right direction on some of those, that's fine. I'm more concerned about actual full-time and/or part-time positions that I need to get in place for September. I'm not necessarily in need of feedback on the archery program, for example, or the trap shooting program or Project Adventure and those kinds of things that are still being developed with input from the staff.
Okay. However, that still has to be submitted as part of the July 15th deadline, correct?
Not necessarily. It
be amended.
depends on what is going under the CRSSA grant, which
Right.
is those activities. And those, whatever is submitted can always be amended.
Okay.
So it's not a one shot. It's typical of any grant that we submit that we can send amendments in.
Okay.
So
But amendments to the program that you submitted, not necessarily new programming if it's something that the board decides not to move
you
forward
can
with.
submit amendments to the overall plan to spend the money. So if you said take program A out and we want to put program B in, we can still do that through an
Okay.
amendment.
All right. Thank you for that clarification.
Nothing that we do on July 15th is final. Is that correct?
That's correct. We can continue to file amendments, but I do need to file an application for the full amount of the CRRSA, which is the 3.9 million.
Okay. Because I just wanted to clarify that
Yeah,
so
that's
that
good.
we understand like what it is and
Very good.
how that'll be handled.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we proceed?
Sure.
Okay.
So the first item is the establishment and hiring of 10 early intervention teachers. These teaching positions are either elementary certified, reading certified, or special ed certified. The reason we're recommending this is because one of our concerns is to make sure that any children in our early elementary grades have every chance and all the support necessary as required by the data and the regulations to provide academic intervention services so that their reading and math performance is on improving and on grade level. This is supplemental to the staff that we have. And we believe honestly that 10 might not be enough after looking at the data. But we want to start with 10 because we know that a large number of children will be coming into first, second, third grade, qualifying for academic intervention services because their reading below grade level is determined by district adopted screening and assessment instruments. The other thing is during this year with COVID-19, with the number of students that were learning remotely, those students were not assessed. And there are a number of them. And Jim is going to go over the numbers and the rationale for what is required and why these positions we feel are needed. And I would say, in my view, this is the most important thing that we have in the program. Not that the other things are not important, but I shared with the board articles and research that we've got to get the kids up to grade level by the end of third grade, or their chances of getting to grade level and understanding and reading more sophisticated content becomes more challenging as they move into the fourth grade and up through the middle school and high school. So I asked Jim to put together a memo, and in this packet, going to the second page, I'm going to ask Jim just to give an overview and really hone in on the data, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. So just like Mr. Simons says, this really early intervention is really aligned to the research, right? We know that it's critical K2, K3 to really close that learning gap. So what we have seen is that we have a wide variety of students that enter our schools each year in kindergarten. We have students that can read when they enter kindergarten. We have students that have never been exposed to print, not familiar with how to hold a textbook, or that you read left to right, or the pictures in the story, tell part of that story. So I just want to be clear that academic intervention services are a New York State Education Department requirement. It is addressed under section 100.2 of the Commissioner's Regulations. So early intervention, the K-5, when we talk about AIS, that's occurring outside of the required 90-minute uninterrupted literacy block. So in our K-5 classes, each K-5 class has a 90-minute uninterrupted, meaning it's not broken up by lunch, it's not broken up by a special, it's 90 minutes of uninterrupted instruction in literacy. That academic intervention is in addition to, it's not in replace of. It's not students being pulled out of that 90-minute block. It's students getting additional academic support outside of that 90-minute block when we're talking about reading. So AIS is assigned to students. We're required to do it, but it's assigned based on either a district-developed or a district-adopted procedure. So that's where that universal screener came into play. So it has to be uniformly administered, the same assessment to all students at a grade level. So we have implemented that reading universal screener. It's really using multiple measures to assess students. It's research-based. And then along with that universal screener, that identifies students that are in need of additional support, but there's progress monitoring, meaning that it's a continuum of services, right? So when we talk about intervention, some interventions are differentiation instruction, things that are conducted by the classroom teacher right in the classroom, leading to tier 2 intervention, which is small group instruction, usually one teacher to no more than 6 students at a time. If the student is not responding, it's really targeted instruction based on that screener. So it could identify that these students need additional support in phonemic awareness. It could be the screener could identify that students need additional support in reading fluency or reading comprehension. So it's really targeted instruction to address that need. The students that are not showing progress with that tiered intervention could then go to a tier 3 intervention. What's really important to know is that a tier 3 intervention is no larger than 1 teacher to 3 students, and quite often it's 1-to-1. It's a teacher with an individual student. So when we talk about these early intervention specialists, we're talking about assigning them district-wide. We're not talking about assigning 2 early intervention specialists to each of our 5 elementary schools. These are going to be district-wide employees, and they are going to go to the schools that have the students that have the need. So in theory, they could start out where 3 teachers are working at Red Mill to support students that were identified through the universal screener. We get to the middle of the year assessment, and that population of students has diminished. Those employees could be assigned to a different elementary building, supporting students in the same manner. Again, it's supplemental instruction. I talked about the tier instruction. Again, tier 1, it's done in that classroom. Tier 2 is small group, no larger than 6. Tier 3 intervention is no larger than 3 students to 1 teacher. It could be 1-to-1. Obviously, the students that aren't closing that gap or making progress, sometimes those students become a CSE referral. We saw a spike in our CSE referrals this year. We want to avoid that. We want to address students' needs on the lowest level of intervention possible. Some important things to just focus in on: 375 students were full remote students this year. They weren't assessed in our universal screener. They're unknown. If I go back into that data and I took the 375 students and I backed it up to the 2019-2020 school year, 33% of those students are going to return to us who were receiving AIS the prior school year before this COVID year. Okay, so 33% of those 375 students are going to come back. They were receiving AIS before they went full remote.
So Jim, that's the 130?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct.
That's listed.
When we look at this data down here, the other thing I want to point out is that we have not implemented a universal screener in mathematics until this year. We're going to do that in September. So it is a requirement: universal screener in reading, universal screener in mathematics. We're going to implement a universal screener for K-5 mathematics for the first time. We do not have remedial math teachers in our elementary buildings. So it's great. We made progress. We're going to implement a universal screener. We're going to have a population of students that are identified that need additional academic support. Who provides that right now? We don't have those. We don't have those faculty members currently. So it's great. We implement a universal screener, and now we know, but without these early intervention specialists, we're not doing anything, or we'll be limited in what we have done. And I'll give you a prime example. We've been really fortunate. So students take the 3 through 8 testing. So in the spring each year, third graders take the New York State test in ELA and math. Based on their scores, there are students that are identified that get mandated academic intervention services. We have been reactive rather than proactive in mathematics, meaning that if 6 or 7 students qualified for mandated AIS based on the third grade test, we provide that service in 4th grade. Same thing if a student took the assessment in 4th grade, scored below the cut point, were required to receive AIS, the mandated students have been getting remedial math, sometimes at the cost of pulling a little time from our remedial reading teachers, doing it at the end of the day, sometimes with our classroom teachers trying to find time within their academic day to provide that additional academic support. We are now going to be proactive because we're going to know our students in K1, 2, and 3, and with these early intervention specialists, we'd be able to provide that additional support. When you look at the bottom of the chart, you're looking at how many students in 2018 qualified for academic intervention services. It was 442. The breakdown is by building. In the middle column, you see 2019, there were 479 students that qualified for academic intervention services. And this past year, it's 407. But don't forget about the 375 that weren't tested because they were fully remote. 130 of those students are going to be added to that 407. Okay, so when we start to think about it, and we start to think that we could have over about 550 students in need of academic intervention services, and we think about a 6.5-hour academic day, minus the 40-minute contractual obligation of a planning period, minus the 40-minute contractual obligation of a lunch, our teachers have 5 hours and 10 minutes of instructional time. 550 students needing intervention services, that could equate to 90 to 120 groups of academic intervention. So we know the needs there. There are some charts that I also included, just so that folks know. BOY is beginning of the year, universal screener, MOY, middle of the year, and EOY, end of the year. And those are our numbers based on that universal screening data, but again, for reading only. We haven't taken into account mathematics. Any questions? Thank you.
Just another quick observation on Mark's. Oh, you all set? Okay, go ahead.
So out of the 375 students, sorry. Out of the 375 students that were not tested, not all 375 are going to
33
require.
So I took those 375 students. I went back into the 2019, 2020 school year to look at those 375 remote students. 33% of them received AIS when they were in-person instruction the year before. So they were receiving that additional academic support. They went fully remote where we didn't necessarily provide that service in the remote environment. So they're on our radar that coming back from a full year remote, they had that academic need before they went full remote. One could assume that that need is still going to be there. It's an unknown.
So it's really a minimum number of kids on remote that we believe based on the prior full year of school.
So you're
would need
really
AIS.
only,
So, and then those other kids are the unknown. They may or may not need AIS.
so you're really, if you go by 18 numbers, 19 numbers, and 20 numbers with the, including your 33% of the 375, they're not tested, it's not a huge increase.
I'm estimating at least 544 students in ELA in reading alone will need academic intervention services.
But we supported 479 of those students in 2019 with current staffing levels. And we supported in 2020, 407 of those students with current staffing levels. So the increase, if we do get the total 550 students, you're not talking a real increase from 2020, 2019, or even 2018. So it's a slight increase, not a huge increase in students.
You're
It's
looking
also an
at,
increase in the number of minutes of service that those students might need. It's twofold. Yes, there is going to be additional students that are going to need AAS who maybe not received AAS, but they may go from 3 days a week to 5 days a week because of whatever their testing indicates. So it's the increase of staffing supports more kids needing the service and more kids needing the service more frequently during the week.
Yeah, I'll give you another example that occurred this year. So we gave the universal screener in reading this year, and if we use the same cut points that we used the prior 2 years, it was about 70% of our students qualified for AIS. We couldn't provide AIS with our current staffing to that number of students. We had to adjust our cut point so that we could manage the students that were receiving AIS. So we had consistency in all 5 students. If that student attended Red Mill, DPS, Green, it was irrelevant. We were consistent in the students that received that service. We just couldn't provide the service to all of the students that scored below the cut point that we had used the prior 2 years. Too many students scored below that cut point. So it could be academic loss from March until June, and they came back to us in September, and that loss was already there. One could predict that we may see something very similar again this year. So, I could show you on paper 544 students on our radar that received academic intervention services either prior to going fully remote or plus the students that were receiving it at the end of this year. We haven't taken into account any kind of academic loss or learning loss from the COVID-19 pandemic that we faced, and we have yet to consider mathematics. So we're going to give the universal screener in mathematics. In a non-COVID year, what I would predict from this office is that Mrs. Wager would see a budget request for additional academic intervention teachers. And moving forward, we have a universal screener in mathematics. Somebody's got to deliver that additional academic support when those students are identified. So in a non-COVID year, I would predict that we're still going to see an increase in academic intervention staff.
So this program then is a 1-year program?
It'll likely be a 3-year program because we have to figure out to bring all the kids up to where they need to be as best as possible. We plan to phase it down each year, and I asked Marissa to look at and I think this is in your folder, the number of teachers in these certification areas that are going to retire, and many are eligible to retire now. So we would anticipate through attrition. The first thing is we want to evaluate the program's effectiveness. If the kids are increasing in their reading levels, we have fewer kids needing tier 2 or tier 3 interventions in AIS. We will look at we will have real data to project the staffing for 22, 23. And we have a list of people in these certification areas that are eligible for retirement now or will be eligible for retirement up until 2023. So Alyssa. Marissa.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. So I had passed out, before we began today, a spreadsheet with the attrition data. So you will note that there are 15 teachers in the certification area of elementary, reading, or special education that are eligible to retire, meaning that they meet that age requirement and have all of their service years. We have 9 total that can retire effective immediately. So if they put in a letter of resignation at this point, they would meet all of the qualifications to do so. We have 11 elementary teachers that are eligible for retirement within the next 3 years. We have 2 reading teachers and 2 special education teachers, which brings our total to 15. So when we are looking to hire, we would be looking majority in the elementary tenure area because that is where most of our staff will be retiring from.
The thing I would add is if your academic intervention services program is effective, you should see fewer kids needing the service, and you should be able to reduce the level of service over time. So one of the things that we would be doing is this universal screener, the Renaissance tool that Jim is recommending will provide us with the data that we need to continue to evaluate how kids are doing with these extra staff services being provided. And we would bring that through the committees, the CCS committee, the education committee, and up to the board. So you would be able to see the impact that this is having on the kids and the adjustments that we're making to be able to ensure that it's meeting its objective, which is to get the kids on level in the next few years, reduce the number of kids that are lower than level, and make sure that we don't incur the obligations for all of the extra staff once the money's run out. So it's really a 3-year cycle, but we would be looking to shift, reduce where needed based on how well the program is doing and how well the students are performing.
We
And we have the
know,
assessment to do it.
we know we get our bang for our buck, so to speak, with early intervention. We know that providing that additional support in K1, 2, and grade 3 is critical. We know that our students, once they hit AIS in grades 4 and 5, they struggle all the way through. So if the intervention is effective, that's why you're progress monitoring. Those students, you catch them early and they recover, they close that gap. That's the importance of really early intervention.
So first, I want to say, I do support this program, but I will propose, could we not hire them 10 all at once? I feel like we're jumping in too quickly, and we need to do it a little bit more gradually. It's a big commitment for us to have $820,000 of salary, even though we have the federal money. Is there a way that you guys could maybe, hire 5 or, and then see how it is half year? I'm just saying, because I understand and I appreciate the concern. And I think it's very important, but we're not 100% sure that these people we're going to need 10 at this point. And could we consider doing it, even if it's just holding back on a couple until we get in the beginning of the school year and kind of feel around and see if we need any more?
I'm always willing to compromise on things, but I worry that we won't be able to have, if we wait, let's say we wait until the first period of assessment is done in September, and we go to hire people in October, I worry we're not going to get the same level of qualified candidates that we would get now, and B, based on my own read of Jim's data and my own experience, I believe that this number is conservative on the 10, okay? I believe that we're going to need at least the 10. So, and I'm pretty confident in that, based on the impact of trying to teach reading remotely this year on kids. The other thing we haven't talked about is, I do recognize it's a big number, and I do appreciate the concern. We have to do everything possible under the regulations for response to intervention and the AIS services to prevent kids from being classified and going into special education. And one of the things that we worry about is there could be developmental issues. There could be issues impacted kids in the kindergarten through 3rd grade because of attendance. The remote learning piece comes in. It's much more expensive if you have to classify students and put them into special education. We also worry about that becoming really not the right place for the kids because we haven't put the initial support in place to prevent that from happening. So I see this as really, this is what this money is intended to do, which is really try to give those kids who have been impacted by COVID-19 a boost in their academics, surround them with the social, emotional, and the mental health services. And it's a less expensive option now than waiting for later on to have students being classified into special education. And I really think going down from 10 is going to put us in a position where we may not be able to find as qualified people as, because other districts are grabbing them up.
What is the current caseload for our AIS teachers right now?
I don't know the answer to that,
Do you
but
know?
I just know that they have not been able, if you think about Jim's they did an analysis this year, which really amounted to triage, to use a medical analogy. We can't service all the kids that are eligible even in this current school year, so we have to lower the cut points to service less kids. So I don't know their caseload necessarily. I just know we had to push the bar down in order to, because of the number of kids that qualified. 70% of the kids at that level qualified for tier 2, is it tier 2 or tier 3 services?
I think we need to take into consideration how much has been done recently. We had no universal screeners before. So students went to instructional support teams and teachers stated their case. A student was showing some difficulty in the classroom, okay, whether progressing as a reader or a writer or maybe having difficulty in mathematics. And the determination was either that the student received AIS or didn't receive AIS. That same student could go to different buildings within our own district and they may or may not receive AIS services. There was no standardized criteria, which we now have. Now the discussions are, should our AIS teachers be assigned to buildings or should they be district-wide employees? They should be assigned to the buildings that have the greatest need. And we don't have consistent 2 AIS teachers per building. Some of the buildings have 2.5, some have 2.6. One of our larger buildings has 3.0. That's based on student need. And if you look at the chart, it's quite different. There's 2 of our buildings that had over 100 students qualify for AIS compared to one of our smaller buildings, 36 students. So, you know, you look at a Green Meadow or a Red Mill, 111, 104. We know that about 70%, that's the power of the data. We know about 70% of our incoming kindergartners at Donald P. Sutherland need academic intervention support. Some really good things are going on at Donald P. Sutherland because when they enter in 5th grade, they're scoring unbelievably well on those state assessments. So we know where the needs are because of the consistent assessments. You know, we are following that data. The other thing I want to add is that, you know, when we talk about a continuum of services, and Mr. Simons mentioned how expensive things can get when a student is a CSE student, right? A student with disabilities, a student assigned an IEP. In 2019, 2020, there were 37 CSE, Committee for Special Education, referrals in K-5 compared to 80 this past year. So that's another data point just to take into consideration.
And one comment in addition to that too, I mean, if you don't invest in the teachers to do that supports the intervention services now, then if things fall onto the regular the classroom teacher, they're going to have to address those issues that those students have in the regular classroom. And then that could also impact the rest of the classroom students, right?
We looked at our dropout data. We just talked about our dropout data, and we looked at that and we did, you know, a case study on each of our non-completers over the last 5 years. The academic struggles started early on.
Yeah.
They had difficulty. They were below grade level in reading. That was the biggest indicator. They get up into the middle school and high school and they got to read in the content, reading for understanding in the content areas, and it just becomes problematic. I mean, if you brought our K-5 principals into a meeting and you showed them our students that have multiple course failures or they're non-completers, our K-5 principals knew that was coming. That's the power of really getting at it as early as possible.
And I guess, and this is the opportunity to use non-budgetary monies to provide the support.
So in my institution, and many of them, when you get federal money and you hire positions for federal money, you do disclose that it's federal funding source. And I understand our hope that attrition is going to work out. But I also would ask if we can entertain, and I understand that might hurt candidates, but it does happen when you have federal money that you're disclosing, hey, this is federal source money, and therefore take it as you may. Because in 3 years, again, I do understand the attrition, but if we don't have that, we're going to be coming up to a financial concern here in district. So can you guys think about posting that component? And I don't even know if legally we can with the union, so I'm not really sure, but just a thought out there on that.
It's a great concern. SED regulations. You can only have a term sub teacher in an assignment, which is temporary, if there's somebody on a leave of absence. You have to appoint people, regardless of the funding source, to probationary positions. What we can say to people is, we would anticipate that over time, over the next few years, we will have to reduce positions. Typically, that comes through retirements, and it also is done by seniority. So you hire 10 people right now, they're likely to be the 10 least senior elementary certified teachers in the district. So they know they're least in seniority, and they know they're coming into the district and they're taking somewhat of a risk, and they're hoping that they'll be able to be slotted into a position that's more secure within the budget over time. But the way to handle that is a reduction in force. I mean, hopefully you don't have to do that, but you can't hire temporary teachers other than through a term sub and putting them in a probationary track. It doesn't mean that they're guaranteed. None of your least senior people are guaranteed a job, whether they were hired under a grant or whether they're hired under the general fund. If you come into a situation a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and you have to reduce staff or you don't have the need, the least senior people are the ones that have to go in the tenure area. That's just kind of the way ed law works. Marissa, did I miss anything on that?
No, Mr. Simons, you are correct. And these folks being appointed to probationary roles, none of them would be up for tenure within this 3-year period either. You know, tenure would take up to that 4-year mark, but would be something that we would be constantly evaluating, making sure if we did have a retirement, we're looking at Mr. McHugh's data and then repurposing that person in the retirement role.
Typically, if people want to be receiving their retirement incentive within the contract, they have to go within their full percent. They have to go within their first or second year of eligibility. So going by this list, you would assume that if they want the incentive, right, they would go within the next couple of years, or they get a reduced incentive in the current contract. The third year is
Correct.
reduced.
The 3rd year is reduced in the EDTA agreement. After that 3rd year, there is no longer an incentive.
I just want to say I fully support all 10 positions, and I think we need to go ahead. Our number one concern that we kept hearing from parents was learning loss. My kids are we don't have them in full time. They're behind. I think if we don't put out these 10 positions, we then have to stand in front of the public and say, you've been telling me for the past year that your kid has a learning loss, but I'm not going to put in the teacher that they need to get that, to fill that gap. This money is there to fill these gaps, to bring these kids back up to where they are. We need to use it for that. This is the number one thing it needs to go for.
Okay. Any other questions on this topic? We have a lot to get through. But it is the priority item
Yeah.
for the federal funding.
Yes.
So,
We're going to move on to page 2 of the template. That's okay with everybody? If at any point you have a question or concern, feel free to interrupt.
I don't think there's a problem with
You want to.
that. That's true.
So,
Right.
The screening tool was pretty well set. I didn't receive any questions regarding the Renaissance screening tool, so we'll just skip over that.
Yep.
The Extended Learning Resource Center. I will just share with you my own editorial opinion, okay, as both superintendent and as a parent in the district. I was surprised when I came here that there was not a lot of tutoring or other support available for kids when they get to the high school level who struggle with certain courses. So if you're struggling in algebra or you're struggling in math in the 9th grade, your options are very limited. If the Learning Resource Center happens to be open during your study hall and there's somebody in there who's qualified to provide support, you can go. But if it's during your lunch that you have to go and it's not open, you don't get the help. So you're forced to hire a tutor outside of the school and pay for that. So part of what we're trying to address here is to have the Learning Resource Center open all day long, including before school activities, and to have it staffed by folks who have the credentials or the qualifications to provide the extra support. So Mr. Harkin provided an explanation that the program would be open all day long, every period. In some cases, it would be staffed by teachers as part of their assignment. In cases where it couldn't be staffed by a teacher, we would staff it with a teaching assistant. Honestly, we happen to have 2 teaching assistants who were hired as temporary teaching assistants this year who have the requisite backgrounds. One of those teaching assistants has been able to support kids. We've had a math teacher teaching calculus and other higher level math courses who has been working remotely, teaching from home with an accommodation. This teaching assistant has been able to support the kids in the class and has the math skills to be able to do that and the knowledge in math, which is surprising, but it's a nice thing to have. The teaching assistant who would provide writing support is working on a master's in literature, as I understand it, and has an English background. So in part, this recommendation is based on keeping the Learning Resource Center open during the day for the kids that need support during the day and making sure that there's staff available who can actually help them with the work. There are other proposals down the line that we're going to talk about. You've asked for us to look at extra tutoring, which we're going to talk about. The extra tutoring would be for after school time and potentially weekend times where the kids need more than what could be provided in a lunch break. You know, the kids going down for a lunch break, that's really not a lot of time to get help if you're completely lost in geometry. So this is during the school day, staff to keep the Learning Resource Center open, provides a little extra support to keep the library open, and we have people with the requisite backgrounds. Ideally, I would prefer teachers to be staffing it all the time, but we happen to have 2 teaching assistants that would have the background, and it prevents us from having to pay to either hire extra teachers, and we don't know that we could guarantee that a teacher would teach a 6th period by covering the Learning Resource Lab, which we would have to pay. We can't compel them to do that under the contract.
I think the biggest question for me is just making sure that you monitor the effectiveness of the activities that any of the TAs would be providing in a Learning Resource Center environment, because getting kids to get into it is really the challenge. Like you said, Jeff, when can they fit into their schedules, some of these drop-in periods, and if it's only 20, 30 minutes, or as a group, is there some way we cluster, get some ideas that are creative about getting kids together who may need support from a classroom, and then follow them along. Make sure that it's being delivered effectively, that there's results, and the parents and kids are satisfied that they're getting the academic kind of support that they need.
We plan to track the number of kids that go for extra help, and we plan to look at the grades of the kids.
That'd be important.
And the impact on the grades. And the other thing that we, again, are going to do is offer an after-school drop-in program, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, I
Be
think
staffed by certified teachers, so you could come after school and get help in social studies, let's say global or in living environment, and have a certified teacher in every area there after school as well, which is a program we had in my prior district, which was very successful.
I think that's great. I think because I know all of us are experienced in the fact that
Another point with the LRC is that Mr. Harkin and the administration at Columbia, when you think about the LRC, sometimes the students that are going to the LRC, it could be the student that has a 91 but really wants to get that 98. So we have started to use the LRC. We've assigned students to the LRC in place of a study hall. So in place of them going to a study hall doing nothing, and if we have that identified, we're monitoring course failures each quarter. We've assigned those students to the LRC where they're getting that extra help every day.
Joanne?
I just have one question. I fully support the LRC. I think it's a great program. My question is this going to be posted for any other TAs that might be interested, might be qualified?
I think it has to be posted.
So we had put out a general posting due to the feedback at the last board meeting. And so what the posting just says is multiple positions, anticipation of need. So it would go out to any and all interested internal candidates and also any and all external candidates because it's been posted on OLAS as well as our district website.
Okay. I just think we need to be mindful. We think we have the selected candidates. We need to be mindful if there is somebody else outside, somebody else
Right.
inside who is interested.
Well, as long as they have the
pre-select.
academic
Nobody's
skill
guaranteed the
set
position.
too,
We
right?
just-
Right?
Right, and need to be mindful of the step that they're coming in at, because it sounds like you're wanting somebody a higher skill, but I don't know if we can do that and be fair to the other TAs that are here. So we just need to make sure that
I
we're
believe
covering
we
that.
generally try to hire the TAs on first step, is it not
We
right?
would hire our teaching assistants at step 1 if it was an internal candidate. And let's say they've been in district for a variety of years and they're on step 8, they were the best, they would get the transfer to that role and then we would backfill their position.
This says step 3.
It was budgeted at step 3.
Gotcha.
It doesn't mean we're hiring the person
Okay.
at step 3. We go a little higher for the budgeting purposes.
And I absolutely support it, and I can't wait to hear the tutoring, because I don't think there's enough after school and on the weekends
I would
where
agree.
kids
Oh,
may
gosh,
not feel
yeah.
comfortable going here during the day, and they need that private time
I agree.
Yep.
for tutoring.
Marissa, does the TA contract allow for experience and other skills like,
So the SRP contract does have language that states that we can hire based on our experience and based on need.
Yep.
So that language does exist within SRP.
so you do have some flexibility?
We would.
So if you have a master's level certified teacher who's a TA who can teach calculus, right?
Right.
Okay.
We would first want to identify exactly like you said, the individuals that had that specific content area expertise.
Okay, good. All right. Any other questions? Mark?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how are we going to track it, Jeff? You said we were going to track it?
The attendance of the kids, student by student, the courses that they're failing, and whether or not their grades have improved as a result of their attendance at the Learning Resource Center.
But how are we going to track that kid that's got the 91 so I'm looking for overall data to support the LRC. Like if,
Our school can provide
last
that.
year, so when they come in, they got to sign in.
Yeah.
So you could say we will take 2020 out of it, but you could go to Mr. Harkin and say, Mr. Harkin, give me the numbers for 2019 on how many people use the LRC, and that data is available. So not only are we going to catch the data that you're talking about, the ones that are coming for the tutoring, the extra help, but we're also going to capture the data that you're talking about, Jim, that individual that wants to, go from the 91 to the 98.
Yes. Improvement. Yes.
And that person,
Going from failure to passing and then improving your overall grade point
right,
average.
right. And that person may benefit one of the other programs too, the after school tutoring, those kinds of things
Yeah.
as well. So there's multiple formats that hopefully the children can take advantage of. Okay, great. Any more questions on the LRC? All right. Moving on to the next
Number
item.
4.
Number 4.
Across New York State and including in our district, global history is one of the toughest courses to pass. It's a 2-year course, 9th grade and 10th grade. One of the reasons why the state has an alternative pathway where you can waive the global history regents exam and take another alternative test. Jim provided some data that our passing rate this year is less than what it typically is. And we're trying to put together a course by adding this point 2 to the social studies department that would provide the kids that struggled in the 9th grade portion of the year of the course with a smaller class size and a course that would cover the concepts, the time periods, the history events that the kids struggled in during their first year with a mix of the second year of the course. And Jim, you want to kind of help me a little bit more?
So typically, we have the 5 required regions to get a high school diploma.
Yep.
Global is the more challenging one statewide for a lot of reasons. It's spread 2 years. So you have Global 9 and Global 10. That is the reason why you have the CDOS and you have the alternative pathways. So if you're in an improved pathway, like the business programs that we put through, you are now required for 4 regions rather than the 5. So the problem is in Global 9, there are students that have failed 1 or more marking periods in Global 9, maybe barely passed the class, and now have to go into year 2 in Global 10. And it's not necessarily spiral. It's the content continues, the curriculum continues to move forward. So the theory behind this would be to identify those students that may have just squeaked by in Global 9, put them with a strong teacher, and the teacher's aware of the fact that they all have some things that need to be reviewed and spiraled and mixed into the instruction in grade 10. So if you take any other global class, those kids are spread out, right? They're spread out amongst the 8-period day, and you have 90% of your students that you need to march forward with, and you have that other 10% that you just don't have the time to go back and reteach. This class is designed to do that. The other thing is, you look at our global passing, which is a whole other discussion, is that without that regents this year, our global passing dropped. It went down a little bit. So there's a lot of reasons, but in short, a lot of times that regents is that safety net. They may have struggled in the course, but they sit down and buckle down for that regents. We also have the 10-day prep over the summer where the kids can take the August regents again too. So without that regents, it may have helped some students, but it may have hurt a few as well.
Questions on the point 2? No, just is this an existing FTE that will be assigned to somebody? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a temporary position. All part-time positions are temporary because they're not full-time, so they get appointed every year and they get a letter every year that their term of service is up, and sometimes they get reappointed and sometimes they don't.
Mike, are you asking me if a teacher's been assigned to this particular class?
You anticipate a teacher being assigned to this class?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it is incorporated into the schedule. Like there's a teacher that we have in mind to be assigned for this particular class.
Yep.
That's correct.
It's experienced.
Yeah, it'll have to be someone very experienced, yeah.
So then you're going to hire a point 2 to cover for that teacher? Correct.
Potentially, yeah.
Right, and we have an existing part-time teacher now, so if that person was interested, we would want them applied to the process. We have a current 0.4.
Great.
If the schedule allows, that could be an additional 0.2, and we would go through the formal interview process.
And part-time positions are annual appointments anyway, so.
Annual appointment, it's temporary in
So
nature.
no commitment, no probationary period.
Mhm.
So was the person going to be a point 4 or a point 2?
Now they're going to be 0.6.
They could potentially be a 0.6 if the schedule allows, but again, we would post for that internally and externally, and the best candidate would get the position.
It's an additional 0.2
You
for
already
social
point,
studies.
the 0.4
Where
is
it
already
goes,
needed. I think you
we'll
did
shake
that at
out.
the last meeting.
That is correct.
You appointed all of our part-time
Yep.
people that were needed for the schedule prior to this.
Right.
So this person would be asked if they wanted to go from 0.4 to 0.2.
Sorry, Mr.
0.4
Simons,
to
0.4 to
excuse me.
0.6.
Thank you.
Got
So
it.
it'd be on top of what they're getting, it'd be an additional 10.5 per year. Or is that,
Based on what Marissa said, yes, that person goes from 0.4 to 0.6. It's additional 10.5 on their
Right.
salary.
Mr. Mann, I estimated that amount by just taking I
a prorated
typically
salary
use
amount.
the step 3 masters, and I just took 0.2 of that. And that's salary only.
If we don't need it next year, we don't need it next year, right? Or the following year. We'll see how successful that program is in helping those students.
It's still only a 0.2 added to the schedule.
Yes, yeah, that's
From
the,
what we
That's the
would
net effect.
otherwise have if we didn't do this.
Yeah.
It's a 0.2 addition.
it just appears that you're looking to hire a point 2 FTE social studies teacher
Yes,
is what this.
that's correct. That's correct.
Which you divide a point two, you'd never find anybody. Right? Unless they're retired.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions on that item? Social studies? And we'll move to then item 5.
Okay, these were AIS positions that were already in the general fund budget.
Yep.
They were already approved, so I didn't receive any questions about those.
Right. Discussed that last meeting. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Item 6.
After-school programs, we would anticipate that these programs would probably not start right in September
Mhm.
because they involve our current full-time teachers working after school. There'll be some time to adjust to the beginning of the year. We would be paying them to stay after school for 2 hours per day, twice per week in all of our buildings, elementary schools and the middle school. They're going to provide homework help, English language arts help, math help, and enrichment activities. That could include makerspace type activities. It could include crafts based on the student's interest. It's designed to be academic, but also fun.
Mhm.
And the childcare program at GCC would kind of be a wraparound. So even kids that go to GCC could come and get the academic and the enrichment activities here. The rate is $39 an hour. The cost estimate is based on the number of days throughout the whole year. Linda, you want to go through the cost estimate for me a little bit?
Certainly. So thank you, Mr. Simons. So what we did is we estimated this cost at $39 an hour, 4 hours per week. That's $156. For budgeting purposes, I used a 40-week program. So that comes to $6,240. We budgeted this for 6 buildings, the 5 elementaries plus the middle school, but we'll be talking about a different program for middle school a little bit later on. But that comes to $37,440. And we would also hire a coordinator who would be responsible for maintaining attendance, parent communications, accident reports, that type of thing. And that could possibly be, that does not have to be an EGTA person. That could be it's more of a clerical position. So we're probably looking at SRP for that.
There was a question about the coordinator. What was the duties of the coordinator? And Linda touched on it a little bit. Ultimately, building principals are responsible for everything that happens in their building. We understand that, but we didn't want to obligate the building principals to stay till 6 o'clock every night when these programs are operating. Having been a building principal, sometimes you come in the next day and you learn about something that happened. Sometimes you hear about it anecdotally. There was an issue in the cafeteria. There was an issue on the playground. This person is tracking attendance in the after-school programs, making sure that policies related to first aid and accident reporting are followed, and providing information to the building principals so that if there's any follow-up that the building principals need to do, they can take care of it within the scope of their responsibilities. Also, a way to make sure that there's some consistency across the buildings in the way that the programs are being scheduled, and to share resources among the 6 buildings that are involved. So it's really somebody on site, kind of like our site supervisors were for the summer programs that we approved last year, and allowing, coordinating around, going around building to building and staying in communication if there's an emergency, and being able to be a point person.
I support that. I just think we need to be clear that it is not a clerical position, and make sure the person knows the full responsibilities during those hours.
Yes. We'll do that. And the person would probably get mileage to drive from school to school too, just to be, that cost is not reflected in this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Joanne. I think as long as there's responsibilities and expectations of the position are pretty articulated, kind of a quasi job description, I think that'd be good to make sure it's clear. Yep. Any more questions on the after school? Excellent.
Okay, number 7, project adventure is a general category of an approach to physical education and recreation and outdoor education that many PE teachers have experienced in their program and already do. So I had a discussion with someone that I know from my prior district about how the program got off the ground this week. And one of the things she encouraged me to do was to find out what existing PE teachers already have as background. So we talked to Mr. Leonard a little bit about it. And we're going to be doing some curriculum writing. So a portion of this would happen in phys ed classes. For example, we do have rock climbing walls in our gyms. Okay? There's also team exercises and trust exercises and those kinds of things. So there's a curriculum component that will take some time to develop. Jim, I think we've already started talking about how we could do some summer curriculum writing in this area. Have we not?
Yeah, there's a K-5 where it's staggered over 3 years. There's a K-5 physical education curriculum writing going on this summer. They are also working on a 2-week instructional unit in archery. So the project adventure, the archery will be covered through curriculum writing. The archery is middle school, high school, but the project adventure will be incorporated into the K-5 curriculum writing. Next year, it'll be 6-8 physical education curriculum writing, and the following year, it'll be 9 through 12.
So we wanted to kind of ease into this a little bit as far as ropes courses are concerned and those kinds of things. For example, there is a ropes course that kids could be taken to on a field trip at UAlbany, which is a low risk, rather than incurring the expense of buying our own ropes course and installing it and having the maintenance of that. So this might involve, in addition to classroom-based activities in PE, it might involve some field trips where we're taking the kids to ropes courses, nature trails, hiking, possibly other outdoor types of activities to be defined with some input from the teachers. So we don't really have a cost to this right now, other than curriculum writing. Typically, we do that every summer. It's something that we're going to have to develop over time with input from the teachers, and there'll be a curriculum-based component, an after-school component, and a field trip component involved with it. And I don't see it as a significant amount of money, but I just don't know what the amount of money is. Some of it can be supplemented with our existing field trip budgets, for example, and other things. What do we pay people for curriculum writing? $39. We love that $39.
It's based on the proposals that are submitted. So
Okay.
they submit a proposal, number of writers, number of hours, and what the plan is for accomplishing, how it's going to be rolled out. They submitted a summer curriculum. It was part of their program review. So there's next generation standards. There's new physical education standards as well. So it's too costly to do K-12 in a single year. So we staggered it this summer. They're working on K-5 and then 6-8, then 9-12.
But the program would eventually go, I know there was a question, is this program just for high school or middle school? It's really a K-12 program, okay? And you can develop activities where high school kids are mentoring younger kids in these kinds of activities. We used to have high school kids taking younger children with teachers' support, ice fishing, snowshoeing, kayaking, mountain bike riding, and those kinds of activities. So we're hoping it might grow to that kind of a point where the kids are learning outdoor activities that they can do for fitness and health the rest of their lives and appreciate, the outdoors.
I think weaving in the opportunities for engagement with the physical education curriculum and then those other opportunities will just keep kids engaged, much as we've seen it connected to the school. It's an extension of clubs, the curriculum, confidence building, engagement, and physical fitness. So I think that's just additional ideas, I think, around that.
Any questions about Project Adventure? Anybody who went to SUNY Cortland for PE is probably familiar with it.
Did Hudson Valley get rid of their ropes course, Jim? They used to have one.
Going over to Parsons quite a bit.
Parsons, okay. It's a good program.
Trap and skeet shooting. I included in the packet a letter that I received from Laura Gedney and Pete Zugme.
Yep.
A list of districts that participated in the Clay Target League,
Well,
some articles on it. I didn't receive any questions or concerns about it. Well, he's on our radar. We haven't hit him with that yet, but
John, we have to talk about Pete, about teaching that course.
it's his idea.
Yes, I did speak to Pete about that as part of the conditions, but I just want to add for the other board members that I would committed to Pete that I would assist them in this. It's a great growing trend statewide, and the students don't go to meet with other students. They compete virtually at their home club. So it's a real good program, and it's really gaining a lot of momentum and offering options for a lot of different types of kids. So.
Great. On the archery program, we met with somebody from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, who's the point person for the National Archery in Schools program. Linda took copious notes. We put them in your packet. One of the things that Jim mentioned was the including it as a unit in PE, but it would be a unit in PE, but also an after-school activity. And it can go all the way down to 4th grade by the National Association of National Archery in Schools program. In order to be eligible for some of the amenities that they will give you, for example, you can rent equipment from the state if necessary, although we were anticipating purchasing some. You have to have at least 10 hours of instruction in the building, and 10 hours is not a lot. A unit would be definitely more than, a PE unit would be definitely more than that. And we've already had some discussions with Mike Leonard about that.
Already set up and ready to go.
And the Y does it in their summer camp. The Y does it during their summer camps, I believe, too. I see them out there plunking away at targets.
We want our program to be, the kids to be well-trained, the
Sure.
advisors to be
Safety.
well-trained, and under the auspices of a national and a state
Yeah.
organization.
Number 9?
Number 9, Greenbush Child Care Program. We've only had a preliminary conversation about it. One of the issues we heard about through the public comment was childcare. Kim Bourbon is currently not available, but we plan to have a follow-up meeting with her. We did meet with Pam Race. We're trying to figure out what level, if any, of financial support we could provide and how to decide what that amount would be and whether or not we do it in a way that provides money to GCC and they use their existing formulas to reduce costs. One of the things we know is that certain families are eligible for DSS funds on a sliding scale. Those funds may take care of a group of families, but I'm worried about families that may be going back to work, who may not qualify for DSS. But if you look at the chart we put in the packet, if you have your child in before and after school programs for every day of the week, it's $349 a month. So we haven't figured out how to do this equitably, fairly, or if at all. But one of the things we would recommend is if we could, at least for this year, they pay us, I think, $6,000. And is that correct? To use our facilities?
They pay us $5,250 plus a $1,000 donation each year.
We would recommend waiving that at a minimum. And then they would have that resource available to help families.
I guess as long as that money's specifically targeted, I would be okay with that. But I think if we're going to support families who can't afford to send their child to GCC, that's what we're talking about here, right?
Yes.
And I think we just got to make sure that there's some kind of process involved to track
We
it.
haven't gotten that far, but yes,
Sure,
we wanted
sure.
to make sure that that money was utilized to help families.
Okay.
Well, as far as
Just-
providing other financial.
It's almost like a
assistance, we're not
scholarship
sure- We're not
kind
sure.
of-
We haven't gotten enough information back from them to know
Is that what we're trying to do?
how that would be utilized.
There
Kathleen?
are a couple other after-school care programs. Is there going to be a problem if we help one and not the others? I'm asking. I
Which
don't
ones do we
know.
have? I don't know.
Well, the YMCA has an after-school
The Y.
Yeah.
program.
And they provide financial support to
there's-
families too, right? There's private as well. Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind is through the federal government, aren't there child tax credits starting that are now coming monthly? I don't know. My
mean, I
kids
think
don't
this-
qualify me for anything, so I
Yeah,
don't-
I think the concept seems good, but there's a lot of conflicting, like who gets to take advantage of it,
Right.
the group, I think we need to explore this one a little bit more.
We're not ready to make a solid.
Okay, let's
amendment to
not,
this. Okay. just-
yeah,
We're
it's an
we're
idea.
exploring it because it was brought up as an issue. The one thing I would say is GCC was impacted more than some of those other
They're more
agencies when we
prevalent.
shut down in the spring because they weren't able to be in our schools to provide the essential work.
And
childcare.
GCC also helped us out so much by
Sure.
doing St. Mary's and everything
Yeah,
else.
and
So
they-
I understand.
They've been
I'm
our
just-
school-based
Yep,
provider.
And if we give it to any of the parents, we just got to make sure the taxability issues, there's some taxability sometimes
Yeah.
giving scholarships. So,
Yeah.
we just need to know what we're getting into.
Right. We honestly don't right now.
So more to come. That could be a in development kind of program.
Yes, it's in development.
Okay, all right. Concept's good, in
Yeah.
development.
Number 10, Air Force Junior ROTC. We have provided a little bit of information regarding that, regarding the job description of an ROTC instructor. Under the Air Force program, you're required to have 2 instructors. One is a commissioned officer and one is a non-commissioned officer. There's a calculation called MIP, which is the minimum instructor pay. It's a fairly, it's a formula that you can't steer from, but the Air Force will give you 50% of the MIP reimbursing the district. So that's about as far as we've gotten. This program will take some time to get some input from existing ROTC leaders, but I see this as a program for student engagement and social emotional development, as well as improving academics. And Mark is going to help me with this. I volunteered him.
So I talked to the individual who runs Schenectady High's program. And I'm also, tomorrow, I'll be talking to the gentleman who runs the Albany High School one.
Great.
So just to get some, some further information that I'll share with you.
Excellent. Thanks.
Do any schools have multiple ROTC programs, like branches of military, Air Force, Army? No, primarily Air Force.
Not that I know of.
No? Okay.
Like Schenectady High is Air Force.
Yep. 'cause they have
Albany
the
High
base
is
there,
Air Force.
yeah. Albany, okay.
These programs are also reviewed by the national level
yeah.
ROTCs every year, and they receive a program evaluation. It's pretty tight, as you would expect.
As a person that went to LaSalle, I was familiar with the ROTC program.
So that's in development as well. Okay.
Very good.
Under mental health, we shared with you that we sent a letter requesting a school-based satellite mental health clinic. We proposed that it be located at Goff, but it be open to all students. They suggested that typically they do 1 day a week to see what the caseload
Mhm.
would be. We asked them to possibly consider, since the last time we met, a site at the high school and a site at the middle school. They said they would prefer not to do that until they see what the caseload is, because a couple board members gave me feedback that they felt more mental health was needed,
Mhm.
and they won't do that yet. Okay.
Who's they, Jeff? Again?
Kathy Coons from the Commissioner of Mental Health.
Okay. Just want
They have to make sure that it's viable because the clinic itself doesn't cost us any money.
right.
It's all Medicaid reimbursable. They will be open to expanding it if
Expand
they
need.
are able to,
It's better than-
financially meet the need.
Okay.
The stipend for someone to assist in the scheduling was a concern. We reviewed that. We agree that probably, given what we've want the person to do, is a clerical duty that could be assigned to an existing employee. So we've taken that $500 stipend away. If it grows into a problem or a need where somebody is feeling impacted by it to a point where we feel additional compensation is needed, we'll come back and discuss it with the board.
Who interacts with the existing Spencer County person? Like, is it
I started the conversation. Or you
no, I mean, yes, in the current
this
model
one?
we have now, we have a
Yeah.
a person who helps.
She's
they
a
interact with
prevention
guidance.
specialist. She's not a clinical therapist.
Okay.
Currently, and the way the contract works with the district, she does drug and alcohol prevention and other issues. She may or may not be interested in this position. I don't honestly know. This is somebody that if you were going to go for outside counseling, family counseling, or therapy outside of the district, you could do the same, you could receive the same service and the same clinical support in district provided by a Rensselaer County Master's of Social Work.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the interaction between in-school staff, county, making sure that there's a wraparound around for services, that they're connecting the dots.
It would be the initial referral would come from our folks.
Okay.
The in-school counseling component would still be provided by our folks. But to go into more serious therapeutic counseling would be done
Clinician on
by
site.
the clinician.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And it prevents missed appointments. It prevents, kids missing school because they had an appointment. Sometimes families without a car can't get to where they need to get to for the therapy appointments, and it's right on site.
Yeah, makes sense.
Any questions about that? Mental health screening tools, there were no board questions. We're still looking at which tool we might adopt. Capital EAP, we pay for that program already. I'm going to ask Linda at this point to talk about the column that says general fund shift to the grant.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. As you'll recall, back in March and April during our budget workshops, there were several positions that we suggested to you. So as Mr. Simons said earlier, in the regular budget, we added 2.5 AIS elementary teachers and 1.7 AIS middle school teachers. So that's 345,000 that is currently in the general fund that I suggest it is eligible under the federal funds. So I would suggest moving that and charging that to the general fund next year.
It's about the 10th page in of the separate packet if people.
Yes, and then the capital EAP is the Capital Employee Assistance Program. This is a program that provides additional support services for our staff. And as Mr. Simon said, that is, we currently have that in the budget as well, $10,500. And then we will eventually get to speaking about the teaching assistants. We're talking about 15 overall teaching assistant positions. 8 of those are currently in the general fund budget, and those 8 are related to either resignations or retirements. So that's 416,000. So those expenses alone total 771,500. I suggest charging those to the general fund because they are eligible under the program. This would free up money in the general fund, and we could consider another way we could consider using the money is to establish a capital reserve. We would have to establish the capital reserve by district resident vote approval in May of 2022, and then the board could approve funding of that reserve. And that would work similar to the capital reserve for buses that we currently have. So I'm just giving you an example of some funds that could be freed up in the general fund by charging them to the federal fund and perhaps using those funds for a different purpose. And once we have the capital reserve established and we fund it, going forward, we would fund it by board approval. And I would suggest that we set it up similar to the bus capital reserve where we would put the aid associated with, in this case, the building projects back into the reserve. Are there any questions on that idea?
We're going to come back to that concept when we talk about the HVAC work and the air conditioning.
We are.
So I'm on page 8 of the template. I didn't receive any questions regarding CTEP, to my knowledge.
Do we want to talk about the equine program?
Did I skip over the equine program?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yes, it's on the bottom of that. Okay. There's a memo in your packet regarding the equine program. There was a question, could it be open to other programs? Yes, it can. In the past, I believe some of the special education classes joined CAP, and we will talk to the advisors about that, and I don't see it as any issue. Andrea Neiman gave us a proposal. Linda, you want to go through the cost of the proposal?
Thank you, Mr. Simons. As Mr. Simons said, Andrea Neiman submitted the proposal. This is a program that we have had previously. The $9,900 is the proposal. I put $10,000 into the budget, but basically that would cover an anticipated 2-hour session. Will be $300 to $400 each. Busing would be between $200 and $350 per session, plus snacks per session. And so the estimated cost for 4 annual sessions for 3 years is $9,900. So that $9,900 is over 3 years. And that is for, for the smaller area that we were speaking about in the original plan. But we could look to expand that.
Yeah, I really encourage.
Yeah, I agree.
and that was one of mine, is
Yeah.
to try to get, more people involved in it. It's a
Does
great
the-
program.
Yeah, does the equine program extend to special education students as well?
Can we do any students with like an application type process?
Yes. I think it's a pretty
Sort of a
open-ended,
therapeutic.
to be honest. I think, knowing the people involved, and I think it'll be pretty open-ended.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Not just reserved for
Sure.
the,
How was that funded in the past?
I think it was in the general. fund.
Donations? No? Yeah, yeah. Donations, I think so.
There
partially.
were some
Combination.
donations, there were
Combination.
some club funds, that sort of thing.
Raised.
that
Yeah,
went
that's good,
into it
yeah.
before.
That'd be great.
And when I think that he presented it, it was a pilot. And we had wanted them to come back and present, but unfortunately COVID hit.
Sure.
So I think it would be something that would be amazing, and I'll tune in for that.
Great.
To have them come back and present on the program.
Okay.
Good idea.
CTAP, were there any questions and concerns about CTAP? We wanted to just point out that the science teacher that we plan to hire, we're looking for multiple certification areas, which will be difficult because the person could be teaching, 8th grade science one year, 9th grade science the next year, living environment or science and bio and chem all the way up. So.
Just maybe Jim, maybe you know the answer. So what students, if they're identified for this program, could they potentially be going now? Any ideas? Where could existing students who would go into this program, where would they be going now?
The
Eighth
current
graders,
eighth
yeah,
graders,
yeah.
they would either
Overseas
be,
program or internal
they-
programs?
it's a very different
It
student,
is.
so there's an intake process.
Process,
So
yep, yep.
there currently is nowhere for them in 8th grade.
Okay.
They're part of the mainstream
Yep.
in the middle school. So
Okay.
it's very different than middle school alternate program. CTAP is very different than Columbia alternate program or Operation Graduation. It's a really different student that we're really designing that program for. So it's students that may have school anxiety and they don't want to attend school. It's that smaller school within a school concept. So there's an intake process.
Yeah, my thinking is your 8th grade group may be a lot bigger than you think coming in, given what's going on.
Right. My question was, do we have enough for a full time? Which it sounds like we do, but that was the question.
We can
I was
handle the
asking.
capacity. Yeah, I guess that's the big thing. There's going to be a big need.
The goal is always to
Transition.
transition those
Yep.
students back out. So, when you think of our CTAP students, quite often, some of the students that are in our current CTAP program
Ten
have to
potential.
come to Columbia High School for 1 or 2 classes. So that's always the goal, right? So.
And we have the space.
Yep.
Good program.
Food for families, stipend. This is a stipend for someone to coordinate among the backpack programs, communicate with families about the accessibility of food. It is make sure that the needs are being identified, and the suggestion came from a board member. So I put it in, and the one thing I want to point out is when we were in the spring of last year, when we created this community-based program, we had a social worker doing it and Mike Leonard doing it with a lot of volunteers. Okay, but the bulk of the coordination, including Mrs. Taylor as volunteer, was happening at a time when they were able to volunteer because, although Audra had a caseload, it was impacted by having to do it remotely, and Mr. Leonard had no athletic programs to supervise. Now we're back in full mode, and we're not trying to disincentivize volunteering. We're simply trying to recognize that now the folks that were involved in it had a full load. Again, should we be compensating someone? And I think, Joanne, you can speak to this too. Joanne brought to me that she felt there were gaps in the communication and that the need was still out there, but maybe we weren't identifying it and maybe we weren't aware of it and maybe we weren't getting the word out very well. So
I think there needs to be some sort of meeting, whatever, with the social work, Molly's area, to find out how to find these families, because Steve and I were in the Food for Families area every Monday after school. We saw one man typically from Columbia that came in to pick for his family. We packed maybe 5 or 6 other boxes district-wide that were picked up on Wednesdays and transported to the different buildings. And my thought kept saying, we've got to have more than 6 families. And we have 22% of our kids on free and reduced lunch. There's got to be more than 6 families. I talked more to Audra than to Mike because that's more her strength. And she's saying a lot of the schools are doing the backpack programs, so meeting the needs there. So there's got to be some sort of coordination between all the buildings. Mm-hmm. Not that what isn't being done isn't good, but I think we have things that are falling through the crack and we can help a lot more people than what we're currently doing. Honestly, I think the stipend is high.
okay.
If you are able to get the volunteers, really that position would be a person to really coordinate between the schools. And once that is done, it should become really an easy task to keep everything moving.
So I want to say that I completely support it as well. And if you think that maybe one is not sufficient, I would propose using some of the federal money to support 2 if we can justify it. But I would like an analysis done of the stipend. I noted the same thing. I don't know how we came up with it and how did we price it to others, because it's a unique situation. And are those, the person who fills this job, what other responsibilities are they going to have besides that? So that's kind of my thought, but I completely support it. And again, I would actually earmark more money to it if we think the need is out there for this program.
So I'm hearing that you support the need, but the stipend should be looked at, and possibly a smaller stipend for more than one person. One of the things that's been challenging, these stipends in the district are all over the place. And I think as a whole, at some point, similar to what we've been doing with Appendix D, we ought to look at all of them. Because some seem in line and others don't, and things change. And so it's really hard to figure out what's fair when you're starting something new. You have stipends and compensation that range as much as $30,000 for a full-time employee to do certain things in the district. And then you have stipends that are, it's kind of like the Appendix D challenge. We ought to really look at that. But we weren't wedded to the stipend. We were wedded to trying to get the need filled.
And I don't know if we have benchmarks, nationally that we can pull for other schools that have similar type stipends and what they pay, because that's usually kind of how we do a comp
We can-
analysis
we can look
type
at that.
thing. But yeah, that's exactly, and any of these stipends, like, I just don't want to be criticized for pulling something out of the air and giving a number.
Possibly what I could do is support a $6,000 stipend. If we have somebody over the summer months working with Phyllis Sanford perhaps, to really target these families and really reach out to every single family that is on free and reduced lunch. You know, make them aware of what opportunities. Once the program starts running and we get the families, then the work becomes a whole lot less. It's just that initial research.
Could you just establish a budget and then just do an hourly? I mean, some weeks are going to be busy, some not busy. I mean, you could do that too, right? Just have a budget and do an hourly rate for whoever fills his positions and, you know,
You could,
just another
but
consideration.
Like I said, I think that we need to put more time into it right from the start to
Sure.
find the families.
The outreach piece will be significant. And then once you have a routine, like you said, it'll settle in. Yeah.
Is this a one-year program?
I think this is as long as we need it program, right?
So it'll be federal funds.
So at least minimally 3 years, and I think the board would have to decide, you know, how effective it's been and how we can go forward. It could be something that we could do, other fundraising mechanism, donations, other things like that down the road. I think it's like seed money or something.
Liaison could work, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
find donations. We get donations from Freihoffers.
Yeah, food donations.
Organize food drives. If every school did a food drive in their school, 7 months, you know, we're getting pretty much right through the year. Organize, you know, this month is going to be Belltop's food drive. I need, you know, help from Belltop. Get that going there. Move on to DPS the next month. Just get that constant movement there.
Mark?
No, and I think it's a good idea. My only concern is it going to deter
Or volunteerism.
volunteerism? And is it going to deter those people in our buildings now that currently do it, that are going to say, well, I'm not getting a stipend for it, I'll let the coordinator do it. And then all of a sudden we end up hurting ourselves and we now get less people. Because I thought the backpack programs were running strong.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, being coordinated by the principals of the buildings. I just don't want to see us pay one person and then it upsets others to say, well, I've been doing it long before the pandemic and didn't receive anything. And now all of a sudden, you know, we're paying somebody $6,000, you know.
Yeah, I see it as kind of filling the gaps with people we don't have doing activities like you mentioned, Joanne, what are we missing that the volunteers have a hard time getting to, you know?
Right. I don't think the problem is with the volunteers. It's finding the people and finding the programs where we can get the donations.
You're right, the families.
You know, Audra even said that they are over the summer referring families directly to Concerns You for food.
Yeah, right.
So we may reach a point where that's all we need to do is, you know, not have that food pantry and just have that liaison connecting
Refer.
people to where they need to go, Concerns You,
Resources, yeah.
wherever.
Yeah.
Um,
So if I'm understanding what you want us to do, we will refine what we want in a job description type, what we want this person to do. We will look at the stipend and we'll make sure that the stipend is aligned with the duties. We'll talk with the folks, principals who are running the backpack programs, Audra and others, and we'll bring back some more information to you. Okay, so you're not saying you don't support it, you want to just fine tune it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think
Be
they can
clear
just-
about what the person is doing and make sure that the compensation level is
and have it
appropriate.
at Phyllis Sanford and
in the
So
summer.
that way you've got the
Yep.
free and reduced
Mm.
lunch
Yes.
issue.
More questions? Oh, Jennifer?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I think it's a critically important program, but I also don't want to hurt the fact that there are volunteers doing that, right? And then people do stop volunteering because they aren't receiving some level of compensation. one of the things that I think in addition to Phyllis is also the social work component to that, because there are some individuals who are not going to even have a conversation with Phyllis in reference to that. And that's typically a coordination many times between the teacher and social work as well as food service. So I think that there needs to be a little bit more communication and coordination amongst that.
Yep.
And then is there a way to support some of the backpack programs, right? Because we do know that DPS as well, when they did that awesome presentation for us a couple of years ago, they do look for those donations or ability to be able to do it there because it's easier than redirecting. And I totally agree with you, like Concerns You, the regional food banks, the other Anchor is another one here locally, or CEO. Those are all wonderful programs, but many times it's access, right? They don't know where to go or they don't have the ability to access. So I guess if there's a way to shift that a little bit and maybe even have supplies on hand within there and use some of that funding, that might be an option as well.
A lot of it is knowledge, like the Catholic Charities and the Food for Families program, Farmers to Market. These people aren't aware of it because they'd come in on Monday and, we'd say, Tuesday, they're going to be over at Hudson Valley. And they're like, what? And, you can get a box of food, meat, dairy, and everything. And they had no clue. So what Steve and I were doing was going over there and filling up the back of the car and bringing it back to Columbia, putting it in the concession stand freezer. And then as they came in on a weekly basis, give them a little more. We also brought out to DPS. So the need is there. We just need to coordinate somebody to get it all. Another thing too that I think we really should work on is getting student volunteers in the food pantry. We had National Honor Society kids working with us and they were fantastic. They absolutely great. They wanted to be there. They wanted to come back. And it just was very eye-opening to them when they saw the families coming in.
Very good.
I just have to say one quick thing. You've got to be careful with getting student volunteers because you don't want the family of a classmate coming in. And that's going to be very discouraging for the family. They don't know. So
Be aware of that.
the coordinator will take care of that.
Okay, moving to the middle school.
Okay. We met with the middle school administration and the staff, and they met and discussed some of the concerns that we had, making sure that MAP doesn't become a feeder program for MAP 6 doesn't become a feeder program for MAP 7 and 8 unless it was actually necessary for the students to continue in that type of an alternative arrangement. The principals are recommending, we call the program Jump 6. It's really to give the kids a jump start into the middle school. The elementary principals and counselors would recommend students for that program, starting very small. The maximum number served in the program, and I don't think we'll start with 15. It'll probably start around 8 or less. And it would require the support of a dedicated counselor. Now, the dedicated counselor is also helping to alleviate a concern that we've heard for a number of years regarding 7th and 8th grade, that the counselor has 7th and 8th grade responsibilities and also MAP, which is pretty intense because of the developmental age of the children, the issues that they experience in early adolescent, some of the family issues. And so we feel that the additional counselor would help the new kids in this program, but also alleviate some of the ongoing issues in 7th and 8th grade, which are labor intensive. Additionally, there was an equity issue brought to us from the staff that they felt that teaching assistant support at 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade was needed. The teaching assistants played a critical role in giving the kids individual help and support. I know there was a question about whether or not this level of staffing is aligned with what CAP has. It's not. I feel like At this point, CAP could make a request, and if they wanted us to consider a request, we would bring it to the board. This was really just based on what the MAP staff felt was necessary to expand this program to sixth grade. It doesn't mean that we would preclude CAP from coming to us and saying, well, we have needs that have been unaddressed. So, that was our thought process on this.
Looks like it has broad support.
The next position, I'm going to ask Jim to explain, but I wanted to kind of just give an overview of this. This RTI coordinator is a key position to support the data analysis and the evaluation of the extra programs and class for the academic intervention that we're adding, the early intervention specialists. Question was, who does this now? Jim does it now. And Jim is an extremely competent educational leader with a big umbrella. He is not able to, despite the 60 hours a week that he probably puts in to his job, and that's on a short week, get to the level of detail to give sufficient coordination to how the kids are progressing district-wide and how the interventions that are being implemented are they're responding to. So this is an oversight role that fulfills some administrative responsibilities that are under Jim's auspices. But it's also a way of assuring that the delivery of the services that you're adding are evaluated, adjusted, and reported to the board accurately. And it is also a way to make sure that the program's implementation of these services that are being implemented with the way that we intended them to. Anything to add?
Just a couple quick things. So, we become much more data driven. That was a goal of the board, and we have a lot of data. So we have this new universal screener. We're going to use Renaissance Star and reading, early literacy, reading, and mathematics. Someone needs to compile that data. We talked about 10 early intervention specialists. We need to look at that data to see where those early intervention specialists are assigned. The Renaissance Star, our remedial staff and some of our key classroom teachers and our administrators have participated in some professional development on Renaissance Star. Our administrative team will participate in a leadership PD in August, but this RTI coordinator could immerse in that professional development in that Renaissance Star Academy, and that person could provide that training and assistance within the building. So the plan is on September 2nd, our K-5 staff will have professional development on how to administer the universal screener in reading, early literacy, and mathematics. Then when we capture that data, there's going to be some students that are red flagged that you need a deeper diagnostic look at. This RTI coordinator could provide that embedded assistance. We have a turnover rate every year of new staff. It could be part of the onboarding and turnkey training on how to utilize and read that data, how to respond to that data. Some of the other things is establishing consistent entrance and exit criteria. What is the cut point for students to receive services? What's the score in progress monitoring where they would exit that service? And then tier 1 interventions, strategies for differentiation. We're looking, this TOSA, Teacher on Special Assignment, has a very specific purpose this year to support that rollout of the new universal screener, the early intervention specialist. So would this same TOSA position exist the following year? Maybe not, probably not. We may see that the TOSA is a very effective way to do these things. We may have a proposal for a TOSA in a different area for 22, 23. But we see this position this year with RTI and AIS as being critical to support and align with everything else that we're doing.
The salary may not be as high as $150,000. That was put in there to assume all of the benefits and expenses. It's a teacher coming out of the classroom to do this work, and whatever that teacher's step is next year would be what they're paid. So if it were a off-step teacher and they were making, in the neighborhood of $96,000 to $100,000, that plus the benefits would be the high mark. But it could be an 8 or 10 year teacher. It depends on. We don't really have the ability to make a decision about what the actual position is going to cost until we know who applies for it. We have folks that have been involved in the RTI process since we started our committee, but who've indicated some interest in it, but we don't have anybody, in mind for this. There's multiple people who can do this very, very well.
This person won't be sitting in an office in one of the buildings. This person's going to be in those 5 elementary buildings. So they're going to be active. It's somebody sharing of best practices, things that are going on in one building, sharing that information, aligning resources so that the same instructional resources exist in all 5 of our buildings. So somebody that's pulling it together every day and actually in the classrooms and in the buildings.
Mr. Simons, could I just add to that as well? We budgeted $150,000, but as Mr. Simons said, it would be whatever the current step is for the teacher. That too, in addition to the other funds I was talking about, that will produce a net savings in the general fund because we'll charge the actual salary of the teacher a special assignment to the federal funds, and then there'll be a sub teacher in that person's place. So there'll be a net savings there as well.
Thank you.
I have one question. Will it also support data analysis if you're able to find some kind of social emotional learning tool and screener? Although I did see that there was a response today. Unfortunately, that person's on vacation, but.
Yeah. So you have the contact that you reached out to me
Yep.
with. Also working with Questar, had a meeting with Jeff Baker and
That's
Chris
great.
Casey. There's a possibility there that we're exploring too for social emotional wellness screener. The challenge around that is age appropriate, and you're looking at a screener that goes to all of the families. So when you look at some of those SEL screeners, most of them are given 1-to-1. And when you think about 4,000 students in the district, that's not feasible. So we're looking for something that can be like Renaissance Star.
Right.
Students can take that universal social emotional wellness screener on a 1-to-1 device possibly, but we want to make sure that whatever it is, it's very age appropriate,
Right.
very developmentally appropriate. So
Right.
a 2nd grader may not be taking the same screener that
As-
a 6th grader is taking or an 8th grader is taking. So would this RTI coordinator help with some of that data? Possibly.
Okay.
But the way this TOS is written, this person's going to be pretty busy.
Pretty busy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim, is there going to be a need for work over the summer? Is that incorporated into the budget
So to start work this summer,
earlier than September?
we really haven't dug into it that deep. But if it's a teacher on special assignment, it's the teacher contract. So
Okay.
it's the same instructional calendar.
Yep.
We are proposing this as a 1-year program.
Reevaluate.
Another thing I'll point out, which, when you look at suburban council districts, there's a lot of layers. There's an assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction. There's a lot of districts that have a director of ELA, a director of ENL, a director of world languages. We don't have those layers. The TOSA is designed to address this RTI issue that's current. We may see that a TOSA is a very successful strategy, and you may see it being proposed in the 22-23 budget, but with a different design, maybe something in the area of technology, maybe under the social emotional learning, based on what the needs are.
Many districts this size have a teacher on assignment for certain duties, and those duties can shift. Instructional coaches are quite commonplace for teachers on assignment to help with integrating technology, for example, and other areas. So feedback on this at this point?
I think the amount of information and data around what we're asking Jim to do and the team to do, it's going to be a tremendous need to be able to filter through the data and report back to the board and the community about how effective our resources have been deployed, and the data to back that up to say, did we make the right decision? Did we put enough in? Not enough? That's where it's going to be critical, that position.
Teaching assistants. I'm going to ask Linda and Marissa to report on this.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. As I mentioned earlier, we have 8 teaching assistants that are currently in the general fund budget that I am proposing that we transfer to the federal fund. That totals $416,000. In the handout that I provided to you, it was originally 6.5 was in the budget, and since that time, we've had another 1.5 resignations. So that money is in the general fund budget, and I suggest we transfer it to the federal fund. In addition to that, we are proposing another 7 additional TAs. 3 of these TAs are mandated by IEPs. 0.5 is because we have an additional kindergarten section at one of our elementary schools, and we traditionally have a 0.5 TA for each kindergarten section. And then the 3.5 are for the new programs, which we talked about. We talked about the MAP program at Goff, and we've also talked about the LRC program. So right here, we have 416,000 currently in the program, in the plan, but we would be adding another 364,000 for the additional 7 TAs. So that's a total of 780,000 that I would look to include in the budget for the federal programs.
Thank you, Linda. And I'd just like to note that the part-time teaching assistants that are the 3.5 hours, they do not receive benefits.
Any additional questions on the teaching assistants?
Next position is a proposed district-wide 12-month nurse. This position, as you know, has evolved since our initial grant proposals were shared. We included a 12-month registered professional nurse job description in the packet. We've also had conversations with SRP and 2 of the nurses regarding this position. And Marissa, I'm going to ask you to go over the duties in the job description and the difference in the how the compensation would be calculated. It's in accordance with the same rates that all of the nurses are paid based on their step schedule, but go through the details on that.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. The 10-month nurses work 190 days. The 12-month nurse position would be based on a 260-day work year, so it would be an additional 70 days. That would cover the summer months for us. We currently, in the SRP contract, have a salary schedule for registered nurses. What we would do would be appropriately placing them on that same schedule and just paying them that additional for that 12-month work year. In terms of the job description, this individual would be assigned to our 5 elementary schools on a rotating basis. So on Monday, they might be Red Mill, Tuesday, Janae, Wednesday, DPS. So our elementary schools, there would be additional coverage for them 1 day per week, and that schedule would be maintained on a rotating basis. The selected candidate would assist and act as a liaison between the district's medical director and students who require school-based physicals or any other additional medical care throughout the school year. The nurse facilitator will promote a primary care visit instead of directly moving to a school-based exam, helping parents remove the barriers to finding a local primary care provider. This individual also will assist with our continuous compliance with all aspects of the district's reopening plan or as required by the New York State Department of Health or New York State Education Department, acting as a liaison between Department of Health and the community and answering any questions that arise as in the event of a COVID outbreak or a contact trace. In addition to that, helping us with any testing as needed or as mandated by the state and making sure that we're continuing to be in compliance with all of our regulations. The nurse position will also assist with all first aid and emergency treatment of students and employees, making sure we're maintaining and preparing health records appropriately for school authorities, making sure if a student is sick, making sure that student gets transported home, or if there's an injury, addressing that. So those aspects of the job description are all outlined. And we did review that with SRP leadership several weeks ago, and they have indicated acceptance to moving forward with that position. Yes, we have in the contract that we have to provide 30 days notice prior to implementing any type of a position change. And since there's not a 12-month position already established, we went ahead and met with the SRP leader, also 2 nurse representatives, and we received an email from the union president maintaining support for the position.
That email is in the packet.
From the president. It's supported by the body. It's supported by the president.
Yes.
So did he bring it in front of the body?
I don't know. That's up to him.
So, you know, if you're going to say that the union supported it, the union president supported it.
He's the president of the union, though. He's the official designee of the union. He's the one we're obligated to communicate with. And we did.
I know, I do.
So I guess the question's around the process when a new position is created in the unit, any unit, I guess, particularly SRP. What is the process for recognizing the position and according it to the contract? So if the process is just a simple acquiescence by the union president without a ratification or any kind of vote, then that's the process. So do we know the process? Is that exactly it? That's what I think I'm getting at too, is that if a position is created, regardless if it's a nurse or any other position in the unit, there's a process that's followed. And if the union president is the process in the agreement, he has the authority of the body to do that.
Yes.
Or there's an MOA that's involved with according it to the union and recognizing it as part of the bargaining. Is that?
You're correct. So we would communicate with the SRP president in
Yes.
accordance with the contract. They would review the establishment of a new position proposal,
Right.
and then they would indicate acceptance on their end. So there's no MOA needed at this time.
Okay. Does that help clarify the process? Again, regardless of the position, that's the process. So now we're talking about the nurse. We've had the conversations. We have the agreement from the union president. What's next? Are we done with the process?
So then the next step would be we'd want to bring the job description to the board at a future meeting date for approval of our job description.
Is that the one that's in the packet?
That is.
So I guess we have had communication, I think you all know, from the nurses basically saying that they're already doing this and they're doing most of that job. I don't feel comfortable
I don't
supporting.
agree with that characterization.
Okay, I don't feel comfortable, Jeff, supporting it if the nurses do not support this. And I have a
You might as
big
well put
concern
everything
with
out for a
that.
vote. You might as well put
Hold on a
everything
second.
out
Hold on a
for
second.
vote.
So, Michelle, you're saying that the nurses do not support the position.
Yeah,
They support a position.
they don't support the 12-month. They think they can
Okay.
do it in 9 months. They do. We have correspondence on all of us today
Right.
and last week that says that they're doing that liaison role. They're doing,
So
they were helping with the COVID role. So my concern is, are we using the money correctly, if we're doing 12 months, can we do a 9-month and let the other nurses pick up the responsibilities that they're saying they're doing
At no additional cost?
at no additional cost?
Was that discussed?
We are having a hard time filling our summer school nursing positions.
And why is that?
Um,
The existing staff are
The
not?
existing staff are not able to commit to those duties.
Okay.
So this position would help us preparing for summer school. And this year, we have our 9th through 12th grade program. We have K-8. We have.
So we
our
need the
extended
district
year.
administration is asking for a 12-month position in the contract to fill gaps that are not being filled by the existing staff. And they required this as part of their needs to run summer and other programs and other parts of the nursing needs. So I guess if they needed 10-month, they would have asked for 10-month. But we're having a problem with the additional months, so we went for 12-month and they agreed. So did the union president not listen to his nurses? Is that what I'm hearing?
Marissa,
What's going on?
Can I ask if you can tell us what the feedback you got in that meeting with the union president and the 2 nurse representatives? Can you give us a little feedback on what the nurses said, how the nurses reacted? If you could just give us some information on that.
So when we met with SRP, we spoke to them about the needs that were brought forth from their own nurse, and that we received that communication, and we felt it was a good idea to add an existing staff member. We spoke about the new job description and how it would aid in staffing when there's an absence. So right now, we've posted several times for substitute nurses, and those aren't getting filled. We just don't have the candidates. And most recently, we just had a substitute nurse resign. So that was discussed, and we discussed the summer school component as well, just not having the staff available. And it is something that we need to have when we have several hundred students coming into our buildings. We do need that nursing staff. So it was more of a meeting where we were just discussing options and what was presented to us as a need from the nursing unit.
We're not in consent agendas, nurses included for summer school?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so do we have them or not?
We have one individual that took 6 of the weeks. And then I believe there was a couple of other nurses that were able to take some other sporadic weeks in between. But we have one specific nurse working 6 of those weeks. But in the future, that person just might not be here. So we just have to start planning ahead that we'll definitely have somebody for that summer position, because we're just not getting the interest.
So was the point of the question, Joanne, do we have the appropriate coverage right now in our buildings for summer school?
My questions are, first, were the nurses, what were the nurses feeling in that meeting? And I'm
Okay,
getting the
right.
impression that possibly they didn't really voice their concerns as far as
concern-
10, 12 days.
So
The majority of the concerns that we heard were related to fairness and equity regarding the compensation that was on the initial document.
Okay.
That was, as it relates to an individual who was brought in at a lesser amount than our current COVID coordinator. They did not, at that meeting, spend a lot of time objecting to the 12-month position. That came out later in the
Okay.
email that you received.
Right. So the needs of the kind of questions have shifted from when they initially had the conversations.
Yes.
So when we talked to the union president and the representatives from the group, the 12-month piece was fine. Is that what I'm hearing? It seemed to be agreeable.
They didn't really.
Voice they can,
There wasn't
they
a
didn't really
concern
respond
voiced.
to it.
but now that the union president has agreed, there's concerns? Is that
Yes,
what
and
we're hearing?
there is an email that we received this afternoon,
Yep,
late
yep.
today, from the nurses expressing the fact that they are not in support of a 12-month position, but a 10-month. and it's outlined in a memo.
Well, I understand the need of the
Sign back.
nurses, but I also need to understand the need of the district, balancing
Absolutely.
those two pieces, right? So I guess that's where we are.
I think I'd like to say I support the 12-month position because you have to go every single year back to the nurses and try and fill your summer positions. We're looking at doing more and more and more
Mhm.
during these summer months. So we need to have continuity. We need to have somebody there.
Mhm. Okay.
And reading what they said here, they're saying, given our current vaccination rate and the percentage of cases in the capital district, we feel COVID-19 related duties will be minimal. We have no way of knowing that. They keep talking about the Delta variant. We have most of our kids are not going to be vaccinated, so we have no way of knowing that. So I think we need the continuity of a 12-month position, and I understand that the nurses feel that they do a lot, and they do a ton, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for somebody else to still augment what's being done. We can always do more for our students, and if, Tammy in the first email that we got says she brought it up from New York State saying, they say that we can use the federal funds for this and we think we need this position. So they think we need the position. It's just now an argument over 10-month or 12-month. And that seems like an argument that administration really needs to make and not the nurses, because the administration is looking at the entire district, not just what's going on in one. They have a wider scope. They have the bigger 30,000-foot view, and I think that's what we as the board need to be looking at too.
So in the absence of the, John, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a comment.
Comment.
When the district decided to switch to 12-month employees with the principals, there was a lot of dust up over that, and they fought us real hard for our administrators. But because the administration said that 12-month employees was going to benefit the district, I feel as though in this particular instance, I understand that what the nurses are trying to achieve, but the need of the district and the fact that our administrative team has submitted that proposal for a 12-month employee is a trend that we seem to be following so that we can ensure consistency in the way we deliver services. And I see that trend as continuing. And as far as the board goes and people circumventing their own unions and the negotiation process for these things, I don't think it's appropriate that we weigh in as heavily as we have. I understand everyone has concerns, and I don't want to see our employees unhappy, but there is also a process, and it is the district's prerogative to hire the people that we want to hire and take it in a direction that we want. And I think that we've been pretty consistent with trying to staff positions with 12-month employees for new hires. So I am in support of this particular proposal. Thank you.
Mark, you have the microphone?
Prior to all the emails and the letters and things like that, and I had sent my stuff back to Mike, was, the part where, this position would be working with the district-wide doctor. Currently now, each individual nurse in each individual building works with the school physician, correct?
To some degree. I think it's more at the high school level.
So there's
in
no
the middle
coordination
school.
between Dr. Albert's office and any of the schools but the high school?
There is, but he feels like more coordination and help is needed to identify children who really ought to be getting a more comprehensive physical and follow-up care through a primary care provider than what he can provide as the school physician.
All right, so he's not saying we need another person to do that. He's just asking for additional support to have more follow-up with some students that he can't provide.
Yes.
That's what it sounds
Thank
like,
you.
yeah. The position description that's in the packet, just real quick. This is the one that went to civil service? Says 12-month registered professional nurse at the top. Is
So
that our posting or is that a?
that is our job description.
Yep.
We did speak with legal counsel, and that job description is very closely aligned with the civil service job description of registered nurse. The civil service job description does not differentiate between a 10 versus a 12-month.
Mhm.
So we are able to use the same job title, which is registered nurse, and the same job description. We just broke out in 3 categories in our internal job description. So there was a delineation of specific duties.
Okay. So in number 3, if that, sorry about that. If number 3 on this goes away, what takes the place of that work?
If number 3 on that goes
That's
away,
all COVID-related stuff.
we would
Other duties as
have
assigned.
to come together and other duties as assigned.
Or it
And
could drop to a different level, but is the
Potentially,
priority
yes.
is floater, district support, summer school, those kinds of things?
well, I think the priority during the year is we have absences all the time that
Sure.
they go unfilled, and our elementary nurses, they only have 1 per building. So having the nurse go on a rotating basis in each of the building provides that additional support to the nurse. And then also, if there was an absence, we could restructure their day so they go where the need is. But in addition to that, they would be assisting Dr. Albert and also helping us with any and all related COVID activities with the potential of testing if needed.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions related to the 12-month nurse? Joanne, microphone?
I understand the school year. Just if somebody can tell me what would be the plans during summer school time, when the kids leave at noontime or whatever, what will that nurse be doing for the rest of their shift?
Yeah, what are the summer hours you're asking, basically? And what are they going to be doing if it's beyond the,
Well, if they're
Summer school
working
duties?
full, if they're
Yep,
working
yep.
full time,
Sure.
are they working
Yeah,
a
what's the-
7.5 hour day that?
So they would be working 4 hours per day during the summer. And then Mr. Leonard, and I don't know, Mr. McHugh, if you could speak to this, our nurses assist Mr. Leonard with a variety of tasks at the end of the summer that could be spread out during the summer months now.
Yeah, the way the calendar goes, summer school's coming to a close, fall sports are starting. We're transitioning to Family ID, which is an online registration platform for interscholastic athletics. Somebody's got to upload that data into Family ID. So there is the clerical portion. There's getting those physicals ready, getting rosters ready, things prepared like that. Those things have been typically done by bringing nurses in. I'm not sure if that's part of their regular salary or if that's an additional time slip. I'm not sure.
Right now, it's an additional time slip since they're 10 months. So we pay their contractual rate when they come in to assist.
And we've never had a problem doing it that way, correct?
We don't have a problem obtaining coverage for what Mr. McHugh was speaking towards. We have a problem obtaining coverage for the 6 weeks of summer school.
It's additional compensation right now with the transitioning for Family ID. I have to pay someone to upload that information into the Family ID program.
so it sounds like, Joanne, you want to be assured that the summer months of this position are fully utilized and effective for the district. Yep. Yep, I agree. Exactly. Yep, okay. All right. Any final questions? All right. I dropped my paperwork, so I'm not sure where we are. Page 14, that was district-wide nurse. The next one is page 15.
Yeah, there was a question about attendance intervention specialist. Why are we having a social worker proposed for this position? We've seen a number of issues of students not engaging during the impact of COVID-19, and the expectation for attendance was modified. All you really had to do if you were in remote is log on. And we are also concerned that as kids transition back, there's going to be a number of students who have difficulties transition back to an expectation that they have to be in school every single day, full time. There are workshops that have happened through Questar and other organizations where researchers have indicated that social workers, mental health professionals have indicated that school-related phobias, reluctance to come to school, school avoidance is going to be dramatically exacerbated by what has happened during COVID-19. So we feel like we need a social worker to dedicate, at least for this year, to help re-engage kids, re-engage families, identify issues that may be preventing students from attending. It could be a range of things. It could be family mental health issues. It could be physical health issues. It could be kids being self-conscious about hygiene, other issues that require some delicacy and intervention on the part of social workers to obtain resources and other care that might be needed to help children and families feel better about being able to come to school and be with peers and teachers. And we would see this person working in coordination with the SRO and the administration to focus on chronic absenteeism. Jim provided some data.
Part of the New York State Education Department's Commissioner regulations with the ESSA accountability, we had 2 schools, all 7 of our buildings remain schools in good standing, but we had 2 of our 7 buildings get a level 1 indicator under chronic absenteeism, Columbia High School and Donald P. Sutherland. You know, the way that works, any subgroup that even if it does, it used to be that the subgroup would have to have a minimum of 30 students. That's not true anymore. As long as there's 1 student in that subgroup, it's an accountability group for our district. But you look at the chronic absenteeism, K-5, 2018, 2019 was 9.69%. 1920, it was 7.9%. You get in the middle school, it goes up. In 1819, it was 15.31%. In 1819, our 912 was 34.78%. So we saw improvement from 18 to 19, from 19 to 20, but you know, absenteeism rate was pretty solid this year because of the hybrid model. So students turned their Chromebooks on, they were marked in attendance. There are students that did not engage, and when we send our SRO out, a lot of times we knock on the door with our SRO, they look out the blinds, they see a police officer, and they close the blinds and don't answer the door. So you know, you look at the family engagement policy, 1900, it's about building relationships. When we call county services for education neglect, when we talk about chronic absenteeism, that a student hasn't attended school, we are not getting the support that we got 5 or 6 years ago. We're really on our own. They don't take those calls. So it is about building relationships. We learned an awful lot this year by knocking on doors. Columbia had an attendance team. Goff Middle School had an attendance team. And you find the reasons why kids are not going to school. You know, there were some eye openers for me, some things that, you know, we just wouldn't have thought had been the issue. So it could be students that need to see a physician for, you know, personal issues prior to coming to school. We did facilitate some of those things, but that requires us to really go out there and knock on doors. One other thing with chronic absenteeism, something just to put out there, sometimes when the student's not engaging, we discover other things that could be a residency issue. So, you know, you don't have to discover too many of those issues where that position eventually pays for itself as well. But we want these students engaged. We want to make sure that they're mentally well, and we really need that social work component in order to really accomplish that.
Questions for Jim? I think that, you know, something like a family and student engagement specialist is more of an appropriate title than just attendance and absenteeism. I think that the attendance intervention gives it kind of a interesting connotation, but I think it's more about the engagement process. You know, our social workers all do that. You mentioned the attendance teams. I think it's another resource to help re-engage families and students back into the educational process and get them in school. And I think, the amount of effort it took just with the teams. Everyone's doing it, but I just really see this as another resource. A social worker clearly would be the best fit for this. But I think the family and student engagement specialist is more of appropriate. And I think the people who are tracking the attendance and absenteeism from a clerical side or from a more kind of working with the principals, that's a little bit different. So, I mean, they have attendance responsibilities to do the kind of like almost like a tier 1 outreach, phone call, letters, those kinds of things. We're talking about really going to people's homes, follow up, continue follow up, not just check the box, Johnny's out, call them, done. It's that re-engagement process is really critical for some of these families. It's a large percentage. So, and I think a social worker is key to that component. And that's how I think so. I think we're going to see this person pretty busy. And I think, and again, it could be a 2-year position, 3-year, but again, with all the long-term mental health effects of this that we went through, this again, social work, mental health, counseling, those things are things that we have to, as a board, think about long-term consequences in investing in those resources. And it'll come down to when the money here is gone, what does the data look like? Have we been successful? What are the issues we're tackling? Are we seeing the re-engagement? And then can we continue to fund those positions? So.
You should be able to have a good gauge.
Absolutely.
September, October.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
As to whether the kids are.
it's going to be
come back because of the
Yes.
pandemic.
challenging. I mean, we'll know in the first month pretty quickly who's coming back, who's not, who decided to sleep in. Ongoing, yeah. I mean, we'll see the impact. Hopefully, we can re-engage those students, but I see this as again, in conjunction with the other efforts, this is going to get those kids back.
I would agree with that. I think you'll see some very hard numbers, but it's going to be data or information you're going to want to track over the period of time. And I think it is going to be a longstanding issue for you,
Sure.
at least in the next 12 to 24 months, because there's additional issues that have occurred on top of just, right, absenteeism or what we
Mhm.
used to traditionally call truancy.
Yeah.
And the intervention services that are going to be required are very different than truancy type of intervention that's going to be needed to re-engage these families and the students themselves.
And I think the SROs will be a critical process of the
Absolutely.
follow-up pieces, So the initial pieces, maybe it's the follow-up. So, okay. The RTI person and Jim.
We have been looking at that, so.
Oh, I'm sure.
We are
Oh my gosh.
monitoring it every quarter. And, we've always sent out those letters according to our attendance policy, but the letter's not doing it. You really got to get to the core of it. What's the real issue? Why aren't you coming to school? And being able to plug in the right resources. So that's the important part.
Okay. Next item, Mr. Sykes?
Next one is fitness, nutrition, wellness coordinator. There's a job description and a proposal from Mike Leonard that was put into the packet. This position is intended to work with students directly on health, fitness, wellness, in coordination with other individuals within the district. Mike is proposing that the person have a certification in strength and conditioning, but also, as I understand it, would have a background in nutritional counseling and help kids with not only their physical fitness, but their health, their nutrition, and their overall wellness, which is also tied to their academics and social development. So this is considered to be a position that is kind of a trial. See how well it works, see what the impact is on students. The concern I heard was that it be comprehensive, that it address physical fitness, nutrition, work with as many kids as possible, including those kids that may not be involved in sports and athletics, and we would, tailor the position to those requirements. Again, everyone recognizes that the physical health of the kids is tied to their emotional health and is tied to their academic success.
Questions? Joanne?
Fully support this type of position. I guess I want to say that I don't know if one is enough. Do we want to consider putting in the nutrition aspect versus the wellness and have them working together? We've got 7 buildings, one person doing all of that, fitness, nutrition, wellness, isn't going to be able to do 7 buildings.
We might be able to explore a contract with a nutritionist, an outside nutritionist to work with the person. We'll look into that. Rather than maybe hiring an employee.
Right.
I would say maybe you can work with a licensed nutritionist who would be on consult
Right.
with this person.
And bring in yoga,
Yep.
lessons,
Yep.
contract out with many different
Yeah.
ways to reach out to the kids.
Very good. We saw it as being more of a position that's an umbrella, that this person would provide some direct services to the kids in the weight room, for example, and other, fitness and conditioning activities, but would also be a resource to coordinate some other programs into the buildings.
It's an interesting concept. I think that, we have physical education and health teachers in our buildings. So I guess I'd like to make sure that the components of the health piece are considered when we're looking at something like this. Again, this description talks a lot about, a certified strength and conditioning person. I mean, to me, that is maybe an outgrowth of something, this work, but the targeted total health piece, that's got to be done in conjunction with our health program.
Yes.
And our nursing program and our social emotional wellness with our social workers and all the others. It's got to be really tied in because it's segmented is going to be hard.
We don't anticipate the person working in isolation of our existing staff, of working with them.
Yeah, I'd like to see this kind of evolve, I guess. I support the concept,
Yeah.
I guess. A lot of moving parts. Okay. Question from Jennifer?
I kind of like where the conversation is like evolving to, and especially on the emotional, social emotional side, because perhaps it's the mindfulness components, right? So overall, overarching, yes, there's these athletic or physical components, but is there a way to incorporate and then working with the nursing staff, right? Wellness, Dr. Albert, right? Other individuals collaboratively around that and really kind of feeding into this other social emotional component that wanting to address is also some collaboration with food service, right? So then a nutritional component as well. So I really like where the conversation's going with that. And I think it's going to be critically important, right? Because it's the mind-body connection that's going to be key for not just the athletic students, but all students, and to get them out and moving, right? So I like that.
Good.
Okay. Next.
So I'm going to defer to Linda. We're going to page 17. We're going to talk about heating and ventilation, filtering systems, and air conditioning.
You want to do transportation first?
Nobody had any questions about that.
No question on transportation?
On any of those. So
Okay.
let's
Just want to make sure that we
skip right over
didn't
them.
miss it. Okay. Skip. Okay. Good. Board support and facilities. Linda.
Thank you. We started talking about improvements to our building and how we could promote clean air. And we met with our facility directors, Director Mr. Bickle met with Train just to get us started on the process. So this is a large number that's included in here. But since then, we have continued conversations, and we're talking about, in addition to some air purifiers in each building, there is a budgeted amount in there for an air purifier at each building, and we were thinking more or less like in the nursing area, because it's not only COVID related, but it's germs in general. So it will help in that area. That amounts to $16,100 if we were to get one air purifying system in each building. And then we talked about replacing the unit ventilators, which in the elementary buildings, which is very expensive. So we got an estimate of replacing 10 unit ventilators at each of our 5 elementary buildings. That's where we came up with this 1.26 million altogether. But since then, we have spoken to our architect, our construction manager about air conditioning within our elementary buildings. Now, that would all be considered a capital project. We would have to get SED approval on that types of things. So this would all be items that we could look at in our building condition survey, as well as when we talked about having a capital reserve and putting some money aside for that type of expense.
I talked to the architect today about timelines. Should you want to do a separate capital project just for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning? He said 3 to 4 months for design, 10 to 14 weeks for submission to SED. So it's not something we could immediately do, but we are having a construction meeting tomorrow where we're going to get more defined costs on the air conditioning component. And we think the best way to do this is to not spend this money directly because we don't have it. We have to claim it, is to utilize the savings in the general fund to create a capital reserve and to, over time, build that capital reserve up to be able to fund the local share portions of the costs. I also think that we should see what the cost is to tie in some of the areas of the middle school and the high school that currently aren't air conditioning, and then we'll make some judgments as to what the scope would be. But you're required to do a public vote, and you're required to submit to SED, and that whole process takes some time. A lot of time. 10 to 14 weeks isn't bad right now.
Right, and when we talked about the unit ventilator replacements, we were really talking about those so that would create efficiency in the filters that we use and that sort of thing. So that's how this all evolved. That's where we started. And I will say that what we're talking about now, would be a major expense. Certainly not covered by these federal funds, but we could look at starting the capital reserve to start to build up a little bit of money for this type of expense.
I think it would far exceed the $7 million. I don't know that figure exactly. I think it's far more than the complete federal monies to do air conditioning. You have asbestos abatement involved, you have general contracting work involved, and you have mechanical and electrical work involved.
Questions on facilities?
Yeah, just looking at, what you sent us out, Jeff, that 61-page document of, what are allowable expenses, in there, in several different spots, it addresses building ventilation.
It does.
To use it, using these funds.
Yes.
And, I was going to save this to the end, but I'll say it now. I don't support stuff that's in our budget that this past vote should stay in our budget. And the federal funds that we get should be used for stuff that we can't afford. And specifically you would think that, that process of, for capital projects and things like that, if it's already approved as an allowable expense, I think would go much quicker than having to wait for a vote by the community
I believe you still have to do the vote, Mark. That's what I was trying to say. I'm consulting with the attorneys on it. Regardless of what the federal law says the money's going to be spent for, we still have to follow whatever state process is in place for state approval of capital projects. And
You just wouldn't have to borrow as much.
you just
It's
wouldn't
like
have to
a-
borrow as much. because you could use portions of, but
Still
you have to
capital
claim that money.
I see what your point is. But
That's correct. It's considered a capital improvement. So all capital improvements have to be approved by the district residents, as well as then the projects need to be submitted for approval with SED. And the reason that I suggested shifting funds from the general fund to the grant, to the federal funds, is just so that we could free up money that could take us out a little bit further. And so if we were to have a capital project in the future, which we will have a capital project, depending on what that is, if we had a capital reserve in place and we have to borrow money, we could use some of that capital reserve to reduce the amount of debt that we need to issue.
I'd like to hear what you said you're checking with the attorneys
Yeah, I've sent them 2 emails and I talked to Jeff Lewis today.
to see what their take is on,
Yes.
on that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
any more questions on the facilities?
There was a little more information in the packet, a lot more information from Peter about the help desk. I skipped over that. He just gave you some examples of things that the kids would be doing and helping with.
That's a great idea.
That's it.
We saw it at NISBA, remember? And those of you who saw school boards? Got it. Okay. The other items really didn't have a lot of input. Was there questions on anything in the tech part? No? No?
There were no questions on food service.
Food service? No? No? Okay. Does everybody have any other questions they want to ask generally? I see Mark's nodding his head. Okay.
Mr. Simons, I think we want to talk about the technology component because there were questions asked about why are we not using smart schools money versus this federal money?
Okay.
Okay. So, pardon me?
So you're saying we're using federal money?
You
The-
asked a
the
question,
request
Mark,
is,
about,
yeah.
you felt that the smart schools money should be utilized first, okay? And what we're recommending is we use the federal funds first, which will spread out the amount of money that we have available for future. It spreads out the replacement schedule for the computers because there's no timeline by which the smart schools money has to be spent.
Right. And so rather than, we need to start replacing, we're on that, after that 3 years now on that one-to-one Lighthouse program. So we need to start replacing all those Chromebooks again. And we planned to do that with the smart schools money. I suggest we still plan that. However, we put that out a little bit farther because that does not have an expiration date, whereas these grant funds do. So if we were to use the federal funds now, we could use the smart schools funds for the next time that we need to do that. So basically, it's stretching it out from 3 years to 6 years.
Any other technology-related questions? Okay. I think that concludes the summary then. All right. Any closing remarks or comments? Mark?
So just to address like some of the suggestions Joanne had made, some of the suggestions that I have, one of the questions that, I had asked in my original proposal was, can we share any of this funding with Holy Spirit, Montessori, any of the private schools in our district? Is there anything that we can do for them with this money?
We are not required to do that. I guess I would want to understand the rationale behind doing that.
Because we had a windfall and maybe they didn't. So
I don't know whether they received money or not. It's something we were unclear about. We tend to share with them the title funds that they're required, the special ed funds. you know, I'm not opposed to sharing our resources, but I also think we're already at the point where about 1.7 million is identified. And if we're going to pursue the air conditioning piece, there might not be any money for them. Is that correct, Linda?
That's correct. We are not required under these circumstances to share with the non-publics like we were with the CARES Act money. However, in addition to part of the grant money and the consolidated grants and special ed services, we also provide health services as well as an allocation of computer of hardware, software, and library. So we do provide, and we do have a good relationship with our non-public schools within our district. But those are some of the areas that we already are providing additional funds to them.
It was just a question, can we, is there something, even
Well,
something
it's a good
small,
point, Mark.
something?
It's a good point, because if we're not using, say we get the decision of not using the smart schools money for tech, don't the privates get a piece of that?
They already got their allocation, their full allocation
Oh, they already got the whole allocation. Okay, so there's no
in the
new monies
beginning
coming in.
applications for smart
Okay, so
schools.
there's no additional coming for them.
No.
Okay. But they're probably on a replacement schedule, so if there's ways to utilize, I guess the suggestion is a good one. Is there a way to help support maybe some technology purchases if they're on a replacement schedule that we can help with? Just a
What I'm
question.
saying is, I'm not talking millions, I'm talking, is there a way to help them with maybe some small thing that they couldn't afford or can't afford, and that we're able to, maybe one time help them?
We'll see if it's permissible first, and then we'll reach out to them.
One of the other things that was in here was, said we can use some money for the class of 2020, because that's a class that really suffered. That's a class that didn't get the full graduations, didn't have the well-defined hybrid program and things that we have. But it says we can use some of the money to support that class as well. Maybe look at some college fairs or job fairs that we could sponsor here, in our district, and offer it up to that class of 2020 as well as 2021. And it does say that we can use some of that funding for that. Another thing that I would like to see us possibly look at is, and it does carry into our schools, and it does carry into our social workers, it does carry into our guidance counselors, is community violence intervention. Again, something else that we're allowed to use some of our funds for, to possibly look at that. And, everything else, we've got a lot of good proposals here. A lot of them I do support. There's some that I still have more questions on. And we're providing, a lot of good of anticipated support to a group that is really going to need it. But there's one group that we haven't addressed, and that's that middle road student. That kid that is right there in the middle, and he could go to the right or they could go to the left. Is there anything we can look at to look at those students that are in the middle of the road? They're not the high successors, but they're not the low either. It's that middle student. Something that we could possibly look at, to assist them.
I agree with that. Okay, thank
So-
you. We'll look at those issues.
Okay.
All those. Class of 2020, middle of the road students, community violence prevention.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'll just say, great, a lot of work is going into this. Again, I think we should leave our approved budget and use the federal funds for new and improved. One of Joanne's requests was, and you said, Jeff, that it had to be, you think, under the like improvements to the playgrounds and things of that nature. That we couldn't use some of this money for.
I don't
Equipment,
know that you
playground
can't.
equipment,
I just,
improvements?
I know years ago, the cost of a replacement of a playground was in the neighborhood of 50, 60,000 per to do it right. I'm just concerned that maybe that becomes part of a capital project.
But if there was a small,
Because some of the money would be shifted to infrastructure versus direct support for students
Mhm.
and academic gaps. I also support the idea of an access road, which is probably even more complicated than heating and ventilation because we're going to have to acquire property.
Oh,
And
boy.
that does require,
Public
I mean,
road.
I've looked since my first year here at the back, going out to Mannix Road,
Mhm.
that's somebody else's property. You would have to purchase property and you would have to have approved capital project to do that. And I talked to the architect about it today and it would just take some time. It needs to be done, but I don't know that you can get that done and meet all the requirements for doing that in time to use this money. I don't disagree that it should be done. It's definitely an issue.
Maybe our partnerships with some of our towns and counties who also receive substantial amounts of monies could help with that kind of project, Mark. But I'd like to hear more about the community violence intervention you talked about. I'd like to hear more about that. That sounds like we know that families, it's part of that engagement process. I think that the families have impacted tremendously. Any other final comments? Joanne? Microphone?
Just a couple quick questions. In regard to my email today regarding bringing speakers in, and that there's grant money available and there's money in the budget, is this conveyed to the staff regularly that they know that those possibilities are there for them to use?
I believe it is,
Okay.
but
The reason
we do, for example, we do bring in authors and guest speakers
Right.
Quite a bit. We probably could do more of it.
The
and
reason
do it
I'm
more
asking
consistently.
is, and several years ago, the Education Foundation funded somebody
Mhm.
coming in from the Holocaust, right? And was happy to do that. It's not a matter that we weren't happy to do that, but are the teachers aware that that money is available?
I'll have to talk to the principals to make sure that
Okay.
they are communicating what budgets they have. I felt like the building budgets that we provide the principals are
Account for
adequate
that.
to do more activities, and maybe the communication isn't what it should be.
Okay.
That was the reason not that we can't supplement or add more
Right,
and
right.
use some of these funds that are remaining in there. I just feel like a couple of things. One, I recognize that because the kids did not have a lot of those activities, that there's a need for that and almost a yearning for it. I get that. I do think that will contribute to more of these types of social activities occurring, particularly as kids are in the middle school and the high school, help them reacclimate socially to each other. And it's really important to their mental health. So we might see a calendar of a lot more activities. I think in general, the general fund budget has enough resources to support even an increase in that. I think maybe it is an issue of communication and
Right,
coordination.
right. Okay. My other
If we needed
question,
to supplement with this money, we could.
okay.
It's not expensive.
My other question, we'll be getting more information about after-school and weekend tutoring program?
I forgot to mention it. I have it right here. We put this in your packet. What we are proposing, it looks like this. What we are proposing is a 4-day-a-week, because generally we don't think the kids would want to come on Friday. After-school program staffed by certified teachers at Columbia and the middle school, because remember the elementary schools already have an after-school program proposal. The core area subjects, teachers would be available to help kids. It would run at the Columbia High School soon after dismissal up until 4:15, and from 3 to 5 at Goff, Kids wouldn't have to necessarily stay the whole time. If they just needed help with a particular topic, assignment, type of math problem, they could go get that help and they could leave. If they needed to stay for the 2 hours because there were multiple subjects that they needed help in, they could stay. We had a program like this in my prior district. It was part of the academic accountability program for playing sports. If you went to this program, I'm not proposing that. I'm proposing this as separate, but if you went to this program and got extra help, you could still play sports. There was no ineligibility, and the kids got help from certified teachers. So basically, this would be after school. We would expect that if kids were playing sports and other activities, that the coaches would say, you know what, academics is more important, go to this, get your help, and then get to practice. Obviously, they couldn't go on game days, but we would expect coordination between the people working in this program and other after-school activities. So it gives you 2-hour blocks of time, 4 days a week for certified teachers who are paid to stay after school, and provides more access to the kids to get the help they need. And it total cost is about $117,000 for the full year. Everybody okay with that?
So is that going to be part of the proposals,
Yes,
the packet,
it's an additional proposal,
additional proposal?
right? And that has to be added to this amount
Yes.
here. But then then you can subtract the 2-day-a-week after-school program. So the net of it is $111,000 additional.
Okay. Very good.
I was just going to add one more thing with Joanne. So it's not just the Education Foundation that's typically approached by that, Jeff. So I think that that's great, Mr. Simons, that you can get the information out, because it's typically the PTOs that get approached about bringing in extra speakers or authors to come in. And it is a financial burden sometimes to come up with or raise enough funding for that. So if there's a way to get that information out and perhaps afford those opportunities, it would be great.
And it might be an issue of realigning a line in the budget so that it's clearly for that, performance activities, consultants, those kinds of things.
That would be great.
So one last topic is the board retreat. You see this packet piece.
Mr. Dunn sent that today, so that,
John, did you want to talk about the board retreat document that you?
Yep. I'm going to be real quick because I just got word I got to go to the hospital.
Congratulations.
It's really going to happen. So anyways, again, just a comment. Thanks for the meeting tonight, folks. Thanks to the administration for doing such a great job providing us the information. Thank you to the board for the spirited debate and asking the tough questions. I think the transparency in which we operate on is so important to our community, and that we are exploring all options to spend their money and take care of their children wisely. So I think this was a really great process. To the board retreat, in some of the feedback we got, we wanted to touch home base again, being that we're suffering from COVID fatigue. So I contacted NISBA in regards to the custom board retreat that we usually do. You'll see the pamphlet there in front of you. If we want to take some time this week to review some of the topics that are available, some of the things that struck me was the role of the board, which I think is really important because we do have new members here. And one of the things that we all can be reminded of what actually our job is. And the other two things that were new is, paraphrasing, what the superintendent can expect from his board, and then what the board can expect from the superintendent. I think those are really good topics. And what I was thinking for the training, we would like some in-person instruction, because I think getting back to that model will help us as we move forward. And when we structure whatever topics we decide to talk about as far as NISBA is concerned, maybe take an hour and a half or so on those topics. And then that will leave us the rest of this retreat to discuss topics that are important to us, be the board goals and different things that we traditionally talk about that can be provided and facilitated by the superintendent and his team. I think it's really important that we do that. And the other component, and I did speak to Jeff and Mike about this a little bit, that we don't have to do it all in one time. We've had 17 months of really stressful times. And I think it's really important that we just focus and kind of keep it simple and what we want to achieve, and then evaluate that, and then maybe do another retreat, in January and February to try to bring us up to speed. I think it would be really important for us, rather than try to do too much at one time. I think sometimes we have to try to resist that. So those are just my thoughts on putting this together.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Any questions, board members? Supportive? Yes. Yes. Very good.
They'll email you our topics.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or John. John might be tied up for a little bit, but why don't you copy both of us? How's that sound? Thank you. So there was a request for an executive session this evening for purposes of discussion of personnel, I think. I need a motion to move into executive session then. Jennifer, second. Mark, all those in favor? Approved. Thank you, everyone. And we do not have any board business after the executive session. So have a great night. Thank you.